Good morning. I think that works. All right, I think we should go ahead and get started. My name is David Zumba. I'm going to help with Cheryl and Richard to moderate through the agenda and some of the aspects of this through the day. But I think we have a big crowd here today, so I think what we'll probably do is I'm going to turn this quickly over to Cheryl to go through some of the attendance, and then I'll kick off a couple of little notes, and then we'll just get started. Cheryl?
Welcome, everybody. This is Cheryl King. We do expect there to be people on the conference bridge, and so I just want to remind everybody, before you speak, announce who you are. This is Cheryl. This is Paul. This is Cheryl. May I? Captions? Thank you, Chris. Little setup time here. I didn't either. So more housekeeping. Please announce yourself before you speak for the interpreters and the people on the conference bridge and for the transcript. We have a couple of people here who are new to us at the table, but their names have been on the lists. We have Peter Musgrove, who is representing Brian Daly with AT&T, and we have the pleasure of Arnold van Wick from the Real-Time Text Task Force in Europe with us today. He's been joining us via the conference bridge before, so welcome. He will be able to bring us up to date on the efforts with the Real-Time Task Force later in the agenda. I think when we go into the Consumer Blue Sky discussion, you can tell us what's going on out there, and we can get that on the record. In case you've forgotten, I've recently been reminded by my duties as the FCC's point of contact to the Interagency Coordinating Council on Emergency Preparedness and Individuals with Disabilities to remind you that should there be an alert, if it's a shelter-in-place alert, we stay here. This is our location to shelter in place. If it's an evacuation, you go back out the 12th Street entrance the way you came in, follow the crowd up the street. With that, I will announce attendance here in the room. David Zumba you saw and heard. And we have Patrick Donovan and Laura Flaherty of the Department of Transportation. We have Mark Fletcher of Avaya and Paul Michaelis of Avaya. Arnold, I referenced a minute ago. Peter Musgrove. And next to Peter is Don Mitchell. We have Matt Gerst and Shelley Blakely.
Hi, good morning. Shelley Blakely with T-Mobile, subbing for Jim Nixon.
Thank you, Shelley. And Marta Kinder with Time Warner, Angel Ochoa with Comcast. We have Greg Vanderheiden with the Trace RERC, Joel Zev, Chris Littlewood, Mark Stern, Norm Williams, Bob Mather, Kevin Green, Susan Sherwood is here, and Greg Fields, and Elliot Greenwald, and me, Cheryl King. And now if I can go to the conference bridge. Bernard Aboba, are you there?
Yep.
Thank you. Jim Coleman, Ronnie Cotton.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning, Ronnie. Brian Daly, are you able to be with us on the bridge?
Yes, good morning. This is Brian Daly.
Good morning. Sherry Farina has a daughter's high school graduation today, so she will not be joining us. Gunnar Hellstrom, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Gunnar. Brad Hodges?
Good morning, yes. And Madam Chairman, or Mr. Chairman, I might add, one of the participants on the conference bridge sounds as though they're calling from a very noisy environment, and it's can be heard, and it's hard to hear the people in D.C. If we could mute with *6, please.
Thank you, Brad. As a reminder for those on the conference bridge, please mute your phone when you're not speaking. You probably can do it with the *6, as Brad reminds us. Thank you. Rebecca Ledoux, are you with us? I know you intended to be. Bruce McFarlane will probably join us only in the afternoon. Donna Platt, are you with us today? Richard Ray, are you there? Not with us yet. It's a little early out in LA, I guess.
This is Richard. I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Oh, okay, Richard, you are there. Thank you. Henning, are you with us this morning? Greg Schumacher?
Present.
Thank you, Greg. Al Sonnenstrahl?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent.
I'm coming all the way from Singapore today.
Thank you for that, Al. I wasn't going to disclose your travel, but I'm glad you did. That's awesome. From Singapore. Is there anyone else?
Yes, this is John Snap from Entrado. I'm here today.
John, great. Thank you. I believe that's our attendance, David.
Hey, just another additional housekeeping idea. I do have the hand-raising tool activated here, so you're welcome to use that as well, and I will do my best to stay online and try to call everybody in the right order. And I think that was the last thing. At least if you have something to say, you're welcome to log in through there, and we'll use that. I think just a couple of quick things. One, just from the standpoint that a lot of us were at the TDI
Al
conference.
here. Can I interrupt? Sorry.
Yes, who is this?
This is Al Sonnenstrahl. Sorry to interrupt, but I can't get onto the TOHRU. You said the meeting was EEACIC, but I can't find it.
EEAC?
It's EEAC?
No, EAAC?
I thought it was EEACIC.
No, it stands for Emergency Access Advisory Committee, EAAC as in cat.
One moment, please. Okay, I'm going to try that.
Okay. Let us know if you have problems. So as I was just stating, we were at the TDI conference last week up there, and we had the opportunity to present some of the work that was been going on with EAAC. So I had the chance to talk a little bit about where we started to where we are now, and it's really just a briefing. I think everybody's familiar, but just to recap, it was putting together the team, the cross-functional groups that we have here, talking a little bit about our commitments, and really just going through the survey. So really the first thing we had to do was to put together a survey, conduct a survey, and we'll talk a little more about that coming up here about the survey report. But it was just really giving them a little overview of where we are, and then talking a little bit about the schedule going forward, which really caps the report or the recommendations paper that is due this December. So that, just wanted to let you know that. And then if you want a copy of the PowerPoint slide, I'm going to make sure Cheryl has a copy. We might be able to post that on the EAAC website so everybody knows what we talked about, at least at the TDI conference. It's pretty much what I think we're all participating in here. I did want to ask Richard Ray just to see if he had something he wanted to mention at the start here as well. Richard?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. David and all the participants. Glad to be here. I did want to let you know that the National Emergency Numbering Association conference will be taking place in Minnesota 2 weeks from now, and I'm planning to give a presentation there on the EAAC for our communications. So I'm really looking forward to that conference and having a presence there. That's about in 2 weeks. So we're very excited for all the organizing and preparations for that conference. So that's all I wanted to say. David, I know there's going to be a co-presenter there, and that's going to include information about the EAAC as well. So I'm really looking forward to working with you, David. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I'll be there as well. We'll be doing a presentation on EAC. So I think we're getting this down pat here soon. So it'll be very similar to what we did at TDI, but just a few additional things. All right, I'm going to kick right into sort of this agenda for today. And the first thing I have on here is review and approval of the minutes from the May 6th, 2011 meeting. I don't know if anyone has any comments or additional corrections or changes or anything, so if you do, please let us know now.
This is Cheryl. I have had one person come and suggest that they were not able to join us on the conference bridge, but we gave them credit for it. So I will amend the minutes to reflect that that person was not joining us that day. Other than that, the stand is approved. Great.
I like when it moves forward. Okay. All right. Well, excellent. So moving right along, I think the next item on the agenda is an update on FCC activities.
Patrick first.
All right. I'll just lead it off here. We're continuing to work on the next generation.
Announcers. Sorry.
Patrick Donovan from the FCC. Thanks. We're continuing to work on the next generation 911 NPRM. We're planning to have it released sometime this calendar year. We've held a number of meetings recently. And then even more pressingly, we're working on a 911 location accuracy item that we plan to release sometime hopefully in the next several months. And that is what, also we will have several people from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau at the NENA conference as well.
This is Cheryl. To remind the folks in the room to raise your hand when you want to speak, because the folks back in the sound booth can hear, know who's a microphone to turn on. I did want to make a couple of introductions. The Disability Rights Office here at the FCC has a couple of interns this summer. I'd like to introduce Jamel Vinson, if you'll stand. He's a law student with us this summer. Thank you, Jamel. And behind Jamel, I see Richard DeVelder from the Department of Transportation. Welcome, Richard. And some other notables in the audience. The Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau has been very busy. In addition to the items that Patrick referenced, they have recently released an NPRM on CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol, into the EAS, and I know they're working on several other documents that's going to be a burning hot summer inside and outside the FCC, because we're all working really hard. Karen is not able to be with us today, but she has been overseeing the various parts of the Communications Video Accessibility Act, the CVAA, originally known as the 21st Century Video and Communications Accessibility Act. They have a number of NPRMs. Elliot, would you like to just discuss remind us of the status of the NPRMs on the 716 and the Advanced Communication Service? Is there anything to report?
We took comments on, those proposed rulemaking came out in April. We've taken comments and reply I guess it was March actually that came out. We've taken comments and reply comments, and we're busy reviewing those comments, reply comments, beginning to draft the items, and we have a deadline of October 8th to get a final report and order out, and we will meet that deadline.
Yes, this is Cheryl. Thank you, Elliot. That is an important date for a lot of the activities under the CVAA, and just take this opportunity to remind us that that is a deadline for us as well. We need to have the recommendations as well as the EAAC National Survey completed and reported to the chairman by October the 8th. I think that's got it. Okay. Would you like me to just to continue?
I was going to just kick it right back to you, Cheryl. Yes, please.
All right. The EAAC National Survey report is in the works. You received it, an electronic copy yesterday, and I have hard copies here for the folks in the room. We're not going to digest this today. Just wanted to briefly talk about what it is, how we got here, and where we are going from here, or want to go from here. I would like to get it released on June 24th, which would gives us 2 weeks to review it and get your comments back to me so that we can finalize it. Many thanks to Greg Vanderheiden and his gurus working with us. And Henning is no longer with us here at the commission, except for 1 day a week. He was on sabbatical from Columbia University as a visiting scholar to us, visiting engineer, and he was a godsend, I'll tell you. He really was wonderful, and we hope to continue to be able to use his expertise and advice. The report follows the outline that we reviewed at our last meeting in May. We put some meat to it. I know that there are other, I'm just looking through it, and in the beginning background section, the last paragraph is on outreach, and I know there are additional organizations to whom we reached out, especially the deafblind population. Joel, I would like to get some indication so we can certainly give attribution to those folks that helped get the distribution and the taking of the survey. The report has charts, and each chart associated with the question is followed by a narrative paragraph. We hope that in addition to providing wider accessibility to the report, that it can assist in reaching a broader audience across the board of our population. The section on calls in the future, I think, has been of great interest. It starts on page 27 if you are flipping in your chart. Calls to the future and the preferred methods and devices for use in calling NG 911. I know I certainly was most anxious to get the results of the survey for what our population and constituency saw as addressing their needs and abilities and economics, frankly, in the future. And so I certainly direct everyone to take note of that future section, because I think that will totally inform us in a very particular way when we set down to the task of writing the recommendations that we are charged with writing. Our Blue Sky discussion today may hit upon some of that. On to page 39, Greg Vanderheiden, if I could put you on the spot for just a minute about the disability-specific breakdown. It's something that we continue to work on, and you had an idea for its presentation. The disability-specific breakdowns, the supplemental analysis data by disability.
Yeah, in page,
I see page 39.
yeah, page 39, thank you. You knew where I was headed. On page 39, there is a link that you can click on, and this will download all of the cross-disability files. This is hundreds of analyses. It took each of the questions, except for the ones that are big tables already, and it broke it down across all of the different major disability groups that are represented in the front of the survey. Plus, we added combinations that were asked for in the breakouts at our last meeting, such as any vision plus any hearing. And it was determined at the last meeting to not use deaf, blind, but to use any vision and any hearing as the category, since everybody has different definitions for what deaf, blind are. Any mobility, any visual, any hearing, some, sort of collapsing like this. In there you will find two types of data. One of them is a sheet with charts, and the charts are arranged with each disability or combination that we did in a row, so you can go across and see all the questions for that particular disability. But if you go down vertically, you will see the same question across each one of the groups. So it's really easy, for example, to just, if you're doing this visually and we have a separate presentation for people who are not using it visually, but visually you can just scroll the page and you can watch the chart change for each group. So it's easy to see which charts stay the same and which charts change dramatically as you go down the page. In addition to that big chart, we also have the text in all of the charts in text form, and they are arranged so that they can be read, even though they're in chart form, they can be read pretty much linearly, if you will, just read down the page. Because sometimes you want to go by disability and sometimes by question across disabilities, we have that presented twice. So there is one file that lets you read through, and it'll give the first question and then each different disability, and then the second file gives each disability and then under it each question. So if you just want to look at a disability and how it worked, you can do that. If you want to look at how a question is answered differently by different groups, you can do that. And they're both all of these are there in a big Excel file, and they're also there as HTML. So for people who don't have Excel or they're not able to access it. So I urge all of the committee members to go and to read through these and to make observations, things that they noticed. We tried to do some of that for the future section, which was the section that we were working on. And in here what we did is to try to first put the summary data in the same fashion as was being done for the other sections. And then by disability, try and find out what was the most interesting information that we could pick out. So for example, in the question about how would you like to present, we presented the data by disability group, and then we reordered them so that the highest percentages were first. So as you read down it, you can see how different groups will prefer different things, and then we put the percentages. We also tried to capture something else, and I see a few places where it got missed, and that is the number of people responding to a question. This is helpful because sometimes a lot of people don't answer a question. And so you need to think about the answers that you have, the percentages, based on the people who are doing it. Other people felt compelled to answer all the questions. So when it says, for example, using things that are visual, and blind people would say, I never want to do that, because, but then other things may be confusing because you'll see people who are blind who are using things that require vision, and I just remind everybody the fact that people, most people who are blind can see, and that is that blindness is a more general category, and it doesn't mean that you have absolutely no vision. So people, especially the different disability groups, looking at this and trying to pull out, we've done some things that we could think of, but I think other people will have other ideas for information or observations that they may want to look at. So all of the data, all of the analyses are all there at that link, and you can download them and view them in the form that you wish, and then add to the report.
Thank you, Greg. This is Cheryl. Thank you, Greg. Are there questions from the members about the report? I know you have, I do not intend for you to have had time to digest it yet, but generally, if you have questions. Joel?
Just an operational one. What vehicle should we use to send in our comments? Who's the contact point person for that?
If you would email your comments to me, or if you want to do a hard copy annotation, you could fax it to me. I put my fax number in the email yesterday. But if you would email me, or if you cannot email me your comments, then you can fax them, then that would be fine. Any other questions? Anyone on the bridge?
This is Al. I'm sorry. Who are we sending the comments to? Al Sonnenstrahl speaking.
Yes, thank you, Al. Send them to Cheryl King. The email address is cheryl.king@fcc.gov.
This is Al. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and the sooner that I get your feedback, then the sooner we can get it ready for release. As I said, I'm targeting June 24th. I would love to get it released on or before that. So if I hear from 90% of you in the next week, then I may query the other 10% as to whether or not you're going to have a chance to get me any comments. You can certainly tell me that you have no comments, and then that will help with my housekeeping as well. All right. I do want, this is Cheryl again, I do want to remind you that we had over 3,200 respondents who completed the survey. There were partial completion of another 2,000 something, and then there were another large group of hits to the survey, which I think speaks to our outreach, but people who did not participate at that time in the survey. But we are well pleased with the number of respondents that we have, remembering that they were targeted audience. We had target populations, certainly not a representative sample statistically or otherwise. It is what it is, and I think it will be of great use to us and others in the future. We've had a lot of interest in it. So, any other discussion on the survey report? Okay. Anybody on the bridge? No?
No,
Great.
I'm sure it's working.
Great. Okay. We're a little bit ahead of the agenda. We can go right on into discussing the logistics of the blue sky discussion, if you'd like, Richard and David.
I was turning this over to you, Cheryl. I figured you had an idea.
Yes, Greg Van Heiden.
One question that the committee should probably make a decision on so that you will be able to finish compiling this. Originally, we had talked about having disability breakouts at the end of this, and the list that we came up with was actually different than it was a shorter list. It was sort of like, vision, hearing, whatever, than the list that we actually asked people to categorize themselves in the beginning. And so, since the committee kind of approved the old outline, we should probably...
and Richard saying, could you just hold on 1 minute? I'm just being interrupted. 1 second.
This is Cheryl. I'm sorry, Richard. We can't hear your interpreter.
Okay, I'm sorry. Richard said I just had to step away for a second. You can... Oh, and he's back. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. Greg, go ahead.
We should probably decide whether or not we want to have the summaries according to the original format that we had decided, or according to the categories in the questionnaire. Having spent a gazillion hours trying to compile the cross-disability stuff and do the analysis to break them out for the committee, I would suggest that we might want to decide to just stick with the categories. It is more categories, but to stick with the categories that were in the questionnaire, because it means that, in fact, you won't have to be trying to figure out how to combine data and draw conclusions. So either that, or you could try and focus by question. The other thing I found is that trying to do a separate write-up at the end ends up trying to duplicate a lot of all of the information that's in the main questions. So, perhaps you want to have a summary form, and then a form that gives both the summary and the interesting disability specific by individual question. But the committee should probably provide some guidance back to the FCC about what it is that it would like to see that they think can be sort of easily compiled, because that seemed to be a point of confusion as to which way was the intent of the committee. Thank you.
This is Cheryl. Thank you for bringing that up, Greg. Yes, we did have an additional set of categories, and I thought that was useful in the beginning. For instance, I did work up one on speech disabilities that I shared with and have communicated with Rebecca Ledoux and others here about it. And the value that I saw in having that speech disability category was, not only did it say, okay, sure, there were 134 respondents who self-identified as having a speech disability, but that's not where it stops. Then to go into the individual questions of if you are using speech and voice to communicate with a 911 call center, what would your preferences be? In other words, we would do a little more of that work up front so that we would identify the various questions of specific interest to the different constituencies. And then also, we did not include a deaf-blind category. And so, in order to understand the respondents who would fall into that disability category, i.e. the deaf-blind, and with that continuum of hearing and vision disabilities, in order to have that population represented, we have to do some groundwork by identifying the parties that identified as having both some sort of hearing disability and a vision disability. And Joel and I worked on that to some level. I had to veer off of that to do it all myself. But it's our intention to eventually do that and have it available. as well as identifying for persons with hearing disabilities the specific questions that address the functional and access needs of that deafblind population. So I did take that group out of this draft of the report because we had the disability-specific breakdown. But certainly, there's value in doing that greater analysis. Is there discussion? Greg? And then Joel?
I was just going to say that I noticed that the earlier draft had that part about the speech disability, and it wasn't in this one. And I think there is a value in that. It may be better for some, like speech and deafblindness, than some other ones. You might want to circulate the notes and draft you had put together to the committee and suggest or invite other analyses and write-ups that might be useful.
Great. Joel?
Yes, Joel Zeff. I appreciate the efforts and the tremendous efforts that have gone into this to include people who are deaf and blind as a category in the report. I think the challenges offered by this constituency, this segment of our constituency, are significant to address in enhancing access to 911. And I think because of the uniqueness of the challenges of a person who is truly deaf and blind, I believe it's really helpful to keep it in the survey as a defined population, because there was some response, and make sure that it stays at the head of the agenda because of the special area here.
Yes, Joel, I can't quite remember. Did we have 130 something? Or
100, there were 130 that responded deaf or hard of hearing, vision loss, or blind.
Okay. Thank you. We had a hand from the audience. Jim Mueller, with identify your affiliation, please. AV staff, can we have the stand-up mic turned on? Thank you.
Thanks. Jim Mueller with the Wireless RERC. There's been some discussion about whether and how these data will be shared independent of the report. And I think it's great that you have that level of granularity across those disability categories. So regardless of how you decide to format it in this report, will you be able to make that granularity available to people who are looking for specific pieces of data about a very specific population?
Greg Vanderheiden, we have discussed that, correct? And it's your understanding that there will be that data available in your supplemental analysis?
Correct. That link will take you to all of it. There was guidance from the FCC that the original raw data could not be released because it could be used to identify people if you got all the way down to zip code and stuff like this. But one of the reasons for putting all of the analyses by category, et cetera, in a form that's both Excel and otherwise, is that so that everybody would have, and I believe it was the intent of the FCC to actually have a link off to all of these raw data, at least the raw data from the analyses, not the raw data, available at the end so people could do other types of analyses. And that was my understanding. So we prepared the data in that fashion.
Thank you. Is there any comment on the conference bridge? No? Okay. Let's take a
Okay.
10-minute break. 10, 15-minute break.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break here. We're going to pick up a report that we want to bring to you here, and then I want to talk a little bit about this Blue Sky thing a little bit. We had a couple of people that were conducting the Blue Sky that are not here, so we're going to make a couple adjustments right here, but we just need a few minutes among us to figure out how we're going to approach this. Don't leave.
Right. There's coffee, juice, water, and the restrooms down the hall.
Hello, hello, hello.
All right, can we get back?
Hello, hello. I'd like to, everybody back at the table, please. Especially you, Matt
Let's see. I'm checking my hair here. He's sticking up out there.
Oh, you have hair, that's nice.
At the first meeting, I have a tag showing the back of that.
So what are you going to do, just a quick,
I'm just
okay.
It's real fast.
Hey, I think we're ready. I'm going to start. All right, thank you, everyone. Sorry for just a little extended break. A couple of adjustments to the schedule and a few things, but before we get started on the Blue Sky, we're going to turn it over to Cheryl for just a minute to read a report into the record, and then I'll come back and we'll start the Blue Sky discussion.
This is Cheryl King. Rebecca Ledoux, if you're on the bridge, I'm preparing to read your presentation into the record. I have handed out hard copies here, and I will email it to everyone after the meeting. It will fold into the Blue Sky discussion from the consumer's point of view. So, presented to the Emergency Access Advisory Committee by Rebecca Ledoux on behalf of persons with speech disabilities, June 10th, 2011. Speech is such a critical part of self-presentation. It has been suggested that people who have never spoken, in contrast to those who lose their speech, do not think as others do. Therefore, it's difficult to determine what is the best emergency communication for people with speech disabilities to use, since there are a variety of speech disabilities. One idea is to get augmentative, alternative communication devices, AACDs, wired to 911 or include some sort of wireless mechanism so that an AACD user can directly call 911. This concept has been around for a long time and just hasn't been implemented anywhere that she's aware. This is a great idea and a real need. There's a need for some technologies to install a Wi-Fi connection to an AACD, the augmentative alternative communication device, or for a data connection, for instance LTE WWAN, to support some sort of speech facilitation device. This already exists with the iPads, Augies, and several other integrated AAC devices. It is also suggested that speech assistance could be some sort of an app based on decision and dictation assistance, so someone could carry a smartphone with some apps that speak for them. This does require a lot of computing power, but should be on a suggestion list. There are many AAC apps, parentheses, apps for iPod and iPhone, in paren, that speak for someone. This is a very hot area of AAC development right now. There are some for Android, but not many. Start with 911 as the first suite with some stock phrases like fire at my house, I'm being robbed, car accident, or whatever are the most common 911 calls that a person with a severe speech disability might be making. The need to call E911 is understood. However, the caller started calling 911 at will. It would be a large problem, even illegal if going by strict letter of the law, parentheses, calling 911 without having an emergency, in paren. As the iPad is not a phone, but it does make a great AAC device. The way to turn the iPad into a phone is to use Skype and speed dial. If the iPad is connected to any hotspot through its built-in Wi-Fi, then the call would go through. You would just need to streamline the actual phone call process so that someone with a cognitive impairment could do it. If full-time access to the phone is needed, then a person would need to purchase an extra data plan for an iPad. She gives an estimate of about $20 a month. Then this will connect to the net through cell phone towers. We have to remember, though, that Skype needs access to the net. Attached is a sample of emergency symbols, tools that can be added to an AAC device. It is also suggested that people with disabilities register a profile with fire or police department, and attached is a sample of what such a profile could contain. And then she has a draft of a profile sheet, and then there's an attachment by Diane Nelson Bryan of Temple University with emergency communication pictures where a person could point or click to identify what their need is. And so this will be placed in the record and can help inform us as we have the Blue Sky discussion this afternoon. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Cheryl. Back to David. All right, so now we took the little break to just kind of scope a couple of changes into the into the Blue Sky discussion. So a couple of things I want to do is kind of thank Joel Zev and Greg Vanderheiden right off the bat for going to take on the role of kind of moderating and coordinating a good portion of the Blue Sky discussion in the afternoon. So I'm not going to say much more. I'm going to turn it over to Joel, who kind of wants to talk a little bit about the scope and the high level, and then to Greg for some thoughts, and then we'll take some lunch and come back and get to work. Joel.
I feel like I've been really put on the spot here without a significant amount of planning, but also there's less nervousness. I normally would be signing for myself, but I'm going to leave that to the interpreters today with apologies for everyone. Blue Sky. We originally talked about doing Blue Sky at the very beginning session, and what we need to do in our role here is more than just sitting here and doing a survey, but also dreaming up what the future is going to be. And the future is 5, 10, 15 years from now. If you think back 5, 10, 15 years ago, none of the things that we have in front of us were there. So we don't know where it's going to be. We can all sit and think about it. What we really need to look at are ways in which to communicate with 911 in a newer, a different way that we haven't really thought of yet. I'm concerned about that, because off-the-shelf material coming in really does not provide what's happening 10 years from now, and we have enough bright people in this room enough bright people on this committee to sit down and really think about it and come up with solutions in a real dynamic way. Not just give speeches and not just give talk, but share information and develop a synergistic approach to developing solutions to problems both from the techie, and forgive me techies, techie perspective and consumer perspective, and make things better. That's the goal. In my work, I find several challenges. A, many people do not yet have high-tech equipment. Many people do not use computers. Many people do not have cell phones, amazing as it might be. Many people are staying home who weren't home before. Now that we have a new emerging senior population, statistically, many of those people, well, the majority of those people will have disabilities, significant disabilities. Many will become deaf or hard of hearing. Many will become blind, low vision. In my own practice and what I'm working with are people who are homebound, example, quadriplegic. I have a woman who's 60 years old. She now lives for the first time within the last 6 months in a group home. The only part of her body she can use is her right knee, and this has been since birth. And she's a publisher. She actually writes poetry. But she's with people who are caregivers in the home. Suppose those caregivers can't show up. There's a car accident, a storm, something happens. She should be able to have, and we should be able to provide her with access to 911 services for an emergency. We need to be able to look at that. Many people who are deaf and blind are now able to stay in their own homes with some caregivers, but need to have access to systems. And the classic, I've fallen and I can't get up, thousands of people who are aging in place, saving money of the government by staying at home, not nursing homes, really need to have some way of communicating, not through a traditional source of the telephone, maybe the medallion, maybe something like that. Our goal here in this blue sky is to get techie consumer representatives together, thinking about this, and come up with real solutions to make 911 and access to 911 work 10 years from now. I think the paper that we just read by Cheryl, just excellent start. It really gives some good ideas. The other problem here, the challenges are for those without the technical skill or the economic support to buy that equipment, those facilities. Want to pick up?
So we want to
Announce yourself.
Oh, this is Greg Van der Eyden, Trace Center, University of Wisconsin. So the approach we were thinking of doing was to start off after lunch with consumer needs and issues, but also thinking 10 to 15 years out. What is it that is needed? What is it that would be desired? Looking at the different people, different situations, rural, urban, etc. We want to then come back as a second part of the blue sky and say, okay, and what is it of this stuff that could be achieved in, say, 5 years? So we want to first start out 10 to 15, so we're not limited by what is immediate or possible, but to talk about what would be desirable. And then we want to come back to what we call a fantasy force fit. You want to try and take your fantasies and try and force them back into reality and talk about the kinds of things that might be achievable from this in the short run, and so we can separate those from the things that would be things we need to work toward over time. We want to keep in mind two things also, though, that even as we go out into time, then is different for different people and places. We already know that today, that which is possible in the middle of a city that's really well connected may be completely different than that what is going to take place on a ranch out in the middle of a large, sparsely populated state. So we need to be thinking about the mechanisms that will work across these. The other thing to keep in mind is we can think out 10 to 15 years how we can serve everyone. We come back to 5 and we say, but some of those things can't be done in 5-year timeline. Well, then we say, okay, what can be done? So we want to be thinking about, as we come back, what it is that we're going to be doing for all of the people who don't have access now and won't be able to take advantage of these great systems that we think of that we want to get to someday. And again, remembering that even as the great systems are available in some parts of the country, in other parts of the country, they aren't going to be. So this is our opportunity to think. We start out 10 to 15, so all of our colleagues, including industry and everybody else, can jump in and talk about visions for how things might be. But then, as we come back to 5 years, we have to all be thinking back and listening carefully to the people who are in industry, et cetera, about the kinds of things that are realistic to be able to actually implement in the short run, and any ideas that we all have for, okay, so some of these things can't happen real quick. What is it that we can do that is that can help us to bridge the gap and provide access for people during the interim? So this is our chance to, none of this is recommendations. This is all blue sky. We will later be talking about what our recommendations are going to be. So this is a commitment-free zone. Nothing here. This is meant to just get all the ideas on the table so that everybody has things to think about without us, trying to figure out about what can or can't be done. So instead of, we don't want to get into discussions of, well, that can't be done or this can't be done. Let's just sort of talk about, well, I see a problem with this, or gee, this could be a limitation, so that other people can think of ideas. This is the place to have fun. This is the place to exercise your ingenuity. We want all the problems on the table. We want all the ideas on the table. This is our blue sky. Thank you.
Joel Zev, how do we want to proceed? I know we were going to introduce, should we have other comments from the floor? Anybody have ideas and how you'd like to proceed, or what content you want here? How do you feel about this process?
This is Cheryl. We have 10 more minutes for open discussion. As you can probably tell, the lunch is being set up, so we're not quite ready, so let's talk some more.
Paul.
Am I on here? Okay. This is Paul Michaelis with Avaya. The other thing I would like to add to the discussion is that I would like for folks to be asking themselves whether if we were to build a particular device or accommodation, would anybody buy it? I'd love to build everything people ask for, but I will get fired if I advocate for the building of something that sits on the shelves. Along those lines, following up on the comments that were entered a little while ago about the kind of device that might be helpful to certain people with disabilities, those of you with internet access, if you can look up on Google a device made by Texas Instruments called a Vocaid, VOCAID. If you look at that, you will see that the device actually contains many of the features that were requested a little while ago. I helped design that over 30 years ago, and I can tell you it just sat on the shelves. It was a tremendous disappointment. We were trying our best to build the kind of communication device that was just described here a little while ago. We built it 30 years ago, and nobody bought it. So, please give some consideration to whether a product is marketable, whether a technology or capability is marketable, before you ask us to build it.
Lori Flaherty.
This is Richard here.
Just a moment, we're getting the microphones on here. Laurie Flaherty.
I have a process question for this group. And just to step back for a minute, when I look at the charter and the charges for this group, our first task was to complete the survey, and then the charge goes on to describe making recommendations in 7 specific areas within a certain time frame. My question is, how does this discussion fit into that broader charge? What is there a plan, or what is the plan for how this group plans to go about meeting its responsibilities for that second piece?
I think Joel wants to answer that question. Brad Hodges, I had your hand raised. You could be next.
Joel Zev. It's an appropriate question. And I think one of the things we have to be careful of is not think equipment, not think just, Texas Instrument or whatever, who's going to buy it. 911 is a public commodity almost that people need at every point in their life, at every demographic, need to be able to use and get access to. And I think that's the fundamental construct of the charter of this process, is make 911 available. I know in my own work and looking at 911 services, and I've mentioned this to a few people here, I'm very concerned that we have the high-tech equipment, but we're still thinking analog. We really haven't been able to jump from the dialing in system to massaging data at the contact point, 911 systems, and handling that data and getting information and be able to respond with high-tech capabilities at the response. So even though it's coming in one way or another, we have now on the shelf and in places that I visited most of the equipment to be able to do that. We just don't have the thinking yet to make that, to take advantage of that equipment, and I think that's one of the missions we have here. But I don't think it can be at a high cost to the sender. We have to find ways of doing things, and that's, I think, the recommendations of our charter, is to make 911 accessible in an emergency situation to the whole community, including those people with disabilities.
I guess I'm speaking more process than content.
And just to respond, we're blue skying. We don't know. I don't know how this is going to come out. If I did, I'd write it and we'd be done.
And that answers my question, because if we're starting with this process and then moving into our charge, that's great. That's what I needed to know.
Okay.
This is Richard. Can you tell me who's talking, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Lori Flaherty.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
Brad Hodges, you had your hand up and it went back down. If you still want to say something, go ahead.
Yes, Brad Hodges, AFP. I appreciate the process, and I think it will be interesting. I have 2 questions which would be of assistance to me in the context of the blue sky discussion and perhaps beyond. And those are, first of all, what data and metrics do we have regarding these questions for the general population? We have been asked to look at these issues through the window or the perspective of persons with disabilities. I obviously have a fair amount of information about the needs and interests and experience of folks who are blind and visually impaired, and to some lesser extent deafblind. I have no clue about the larger community and the general interests which folks have, and I would be interested in that. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind at some point is, are we looking at a system or a process for using 911 in which people would gain equal access to the same range of equipment that would be used by the general population? Or are we looking at developing community or needs-specific technologies and techniques, or perhaps some combination of those 2 things? And to my mind, going into this lease, those are 2 important higher-level issues that are rolling around in my mind right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Gunnar?
Yes, Gunnar Hellström here. I have a similar thought, how far into the 911 service operation shall we go in our blue sky thoughts? There are certainly, both problems and possibilities in providing communication far out to the dispatched unit, and what kind of communication shall we have there? Shall we think about that? What is useful to have to the endpoint in the emergency chain? Or shall we just look at the communication between the user and nearest PSAP?
I don't think we have any limitations, do we, Joel? Go ahead, Joel.
Any kind of opening of a blue sky discussion, I don't believe there are any rules. We're blue skying. I mean, I think the FCC has the capability of putting directives out that are well thought out and prepared and disseminated completely. I don't want to put any limitations on this at all, or don't think we should have any.
I have Greg Schumacher and then Don.
Yeah, this is Greg Schumacher from Addis. I believe that we do need to consider certain aspects of the existing 911 framework, because there's some 911 has some additional features and requirements that normal communication does not have, and those need to be considered as well, and these such things as location, termination. So I believe that we need to closely look at the existing 911 assumptions and determine, do they apply, do they all apply in these cases, do some not apply, or are there additional requirements as well?
Thank you, Greg. Don?
Don Mitchell, TCS. So I'm a bit of a technologist, but I would say that a couple of things. One is the output of this process only for consumption by this group, or do we have an idea that there are, because there are other groups working on these types of topics, are there other groups that this information, the output of this discussion could go to? That's the first point. And then the second point is that at times, if we focus too much on creating future solutions, that can be difficult. If we can move a bit more towards the middle and do a real accurate description of the problem that we're trying to solve, as a technologist, that helps me in the future. So that's my input.
Thank you, Don. Great.
Okay, so we were talking about what rules there were for the blue sky, and only two parts. One of them is we will start with the part we talked about a minute ago, which is summary of what are the needs, what are we looking for in terms of solutions. What are the issues that need to be addressed. The second would be that we go into a period where we are just putting ideas out, and the only rule there is that people don't write down your concerns but don't voice them. So this is the time to get all ideas out on the table. If you say, yeah, but, write them down, because the third phase is the buts, okay? So let's have a period after we talk about what the needs are, we talk about any ideas that anybody has, nobody speaking against any idea during that phase. And then the third one is we talked about the fantasy enforcement, the getting the reality back involved. And here we talk about, okay, but it's got to work with 911 system, it's got to work with 911 constraints, it's got to work within technologies that we can do. So we get some of the other parts of it too, so that we end up with a balanced view in the end, all the ideas and all the realities. We're not going to try and come to any conclusions today, the purpose of a blue sky is to get everything on the table, but not to try and debate to any conclusions. That's actually something this committee is going to be doing later. And so we don't want to get into any debates. Anybody can put anything on the table.
Thank you, Greg Vanderheiden. We have Mark Fletcher, Greg Fields, and then Brian Daly, and then I think we'll try to take a lunch and come back and get started.
Mark Fletcher with Avaya. When we look at next generation 911 and compare it to traditional 911, I've made the correlation in the past of trying to put a square peg into a round hole. If you hit it hard enough, it will fit, and you will get some semblance of what you were trying to accomplish. But if what you really want is a square peg, then maybe what you need to build is a square hole to put it in. So as we look at blue sky, and we look at the existing 911 network today, let's not get too hung up on making an antiquated legacy network that was built in 1968 when mobility and nomadic behavior didn't exist. And let's build the network we need today to service the functionality that we need today. And by doing that, we'll be doing a service to the disabled community and everyone.
Greg Fields.
Well said, Mark.
Thank you, Greg.
Hello. Well said, Mark and Greg Vanderheiden. Two quick points, not to focus on those issues, but Paul Michaelis brought up a point about some semblance of reality as it pertains to fiscal feasibility and the ability for something to actually work in market. I was part of a blue sky activity that led to the development of the Oasis screenless phone that when I showed it to disability advocacy organizations around the world, had seen it for the first time years after it had been in market. So there is a reality that even though the best laid plans, unless there is a viability that's been assigned to it, that we need to be weary of blue sky becoming something in the marketplace unless there's some feasibility behind it. And I guess the second point is the part about the 911 centers. They don't all currently have broadband, and I've visited some currently where the TTY terminals terminate into a closet. So we have to be aware that there is going to be a reality, especially at the county end, that all the blue sky will not fix in the short term or midterm some of the difficulties that PSAPs face from a budget perspective. So I love blue skies, but that we need to be wary of the other end isn't as advanced currently and won't be in the near future, and that whatever we come up with through the blue skies, that we have some budget mind amongst us.
Thank you, Greg. Brian Daly?
Yeah, thank you. This is Brian Daly, AT&T, and I think I had my question answered a little earlier, but just wanted to make sure on the process. This is just the beginning of the discussion today, and from what I heard is that we'll spend the next few hours this afternoon generating ideas and capturing those ideas. But as we move forward from today, I think we'll have other opportunities then to dive deeper into those ideas that are presented today. That this isn't the end of the discussion today, correct?
Correct. Okay, we're going to get ready. Okay. I think, Joel, did you want to respond to that? And then Arnold.
Joel Zev. I want everyone, after they leave today, to stay awake at night thinking about it. And that I have been. And I know that Brad Hodges and I spoke about this a couple of months ago, and there's lots of ideas out there. And this is just a beginning point. I don't think cost is an issue, because I think things are changing very dramatically and very quickly. I know right now cell phone technology is being handed to battered women in battered women's shelters to have with them. They don't have to pay, it's automatic. 911 still works in that. There's a distribution system for inexpensive cell phones. The challenge of cell phones is to get location. So when someone calls, it's not to the tower area, it's to a specific location. That'll come, and that's part of Blue Sky. But I think the distribution of, the Dick Tracy watch, and some of you might not remember that, I think we might be moving towards that. That if I made a call on 911 on my trusty watch some way, they would know where I am and what kind of help I need because of some activation. That's dreaming, but that was in the 40s. Maybe we're just coming back to that now, but that kind of thinking, stay away, keep going, this is a start. It's not the end of this conversation.
Arnold? Waiting to the human on me?
Yes, you're on.
Yeah. Okay. It's actually very good what you are saying. I'm always thinking about innovation about 10 years ago and what happens now. And then I can remember I cannot predict what happened now 10 years ago. So we are doing the Blue Sky. Think about how much has changed in the last 10 years. Things we could not understand that was possible. Okay, for example, the iPad. I mean, a few years ago we had no idea about it, and now suddenly we have it, and everybody wants it and jumps on it. And like, for example, the problem of connectivity to the internet. I think within a few years we have it all implanted in us, for example, some connection with internet. So where we are on the world, we can have internet. So that are kind of things I expected to happen. But we cannot predict the future, but I hope we can drop the restrictions of the past and see what's possible for us during the Blue Sky discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two more people. We'll extend lunch a little bit, but Paul McCallis and then Gunnar, and then we absolutely will stop to take a lunch break.
This is Paul Michaelis with Avaya. I'm wondering, are people here aware of the recent lawsuit against Wells Fargo in reference to their failure to support TTY users? It was in the Huffington Post on May 31st. With regard to economic feasibility of proposals under Blue Sky, I was going to mention to you that if what you have in mind might be of value to organizations outside the 911 community, such as Wells Fargo, manufacturers would be much more inclined to implement it if we had a large customer base interested in the solution outside of 911.
Thank you, Paul. Gunnar?
Yeah, Gunnar here. I want to protest. I think our charter is much more narrow than what this Blue Sky can result in. I think we are set to make real what has been planned since 2000 or so, 10 years ago. We knew then that we could have mobile phones with all media.
This is Richard here. I'm so sorry.
Just about to live. Yep. Sorry.
If I could ask, the interpreter typing is having problems hearing Gunnar, just to let you know. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Try to get closer. So I want to call back to look at our charter and see that we are set to enable what has been on the way the last 10 years or so, and not fly away in new ideas 10 years ahead. I don't mind this exercise today, but I think then we need to look back to our charter and return to our original work. Thanks.
Thank you, Gunnar. Everyone, we're going to now take a lunch break until 1:15 DC time.
Lunch is here for the members, and please thank AT&T.
Three, two. Oh, hey. All right, we're going to get started here in maybe just about 10 or 15 seconds. So get yourself a caffeine shot of what you need, or water if you're overexcited. And I will try to get my computer running. All right, we're getting closer.
Be quiet for a minute.
Oh, all right. Of course. I think I have to log back into the FCC. I'm just trying to get the hand raising tool up. Sorry.
I'm trying to find the volume on this thing.
You gonna pipe that music for us, Cheryl?
They can't get. Where's it? This is Eva Cassidy, Blue Sky.
Thank you, everyone. Well,
I can't even
I
find
think
the
you're on.
volume on this silly device.
I'm on? Okay, thank you. All right, everyone, thank you very much for coming back close. Okay, thank you. Captions, please? Oh, there you go. Oh, fantastic. All right, the hand-raising tool is back in operation. The music is
Turn the music off.
still intact. We could bring that discussion up this afternoon. All right, so right before lunch, we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of the ideas for this afternoon on the Blue Sky idea. So I am not going to waste time kind of recapping. I think everybody was here and heard it. I'm going to turn this back over to Joel and Greg to kind of go ahead and initiate and get this going. So off to you guys.
Okay. We had a really excellent example just before the break that essentially
Here, this is Richard.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. Oh, it's fine now. Okay. Okay, we're good now. Thank you.
Okay. We had a really good example just before the break from Rebecca of the kind of thing we're looking for here. So this is Greg Vanderheiden speaking. And we had a really excellent example just before the break from Rebecca of the kind of thing we're looking for. And that is talking about the needs and ideas, etc. So we're going to now launch into this. And remember that we're going to start off by saying, you know, what is it that we would like to see? So in particular, I'd like to talk and hear from the consumers, but also anybody else who knows of things from consumers. And I'm actually going to ask Jim Mueller from the Wireless RERC, who's been gathering a bunch of information about this, to just give some initial thoughts and from the work that they've done there in terms of gathering needs, et cetera. and then move around. So consumers and anybody who's been getting input from consumers about needs. Then the second thing we're going to do is to just talk about ideas, anything that anybody has about the ideas, future ideas, things that are coming that we should have on the table. And then finally, the third section is the buts. Okay, so this is where we say, okay, but we have to think about the following constraints, but we need to think about, you know, what we can do today, but we need to talk about the transition. But for all three sections, everything, we don't want to have any debates here back and forth. It's just a time to put things on the table. So in the beginning, needs, then future possibilities, and then finally buts, and all of them just getting things on the table so we can gather as much stuff as we can. Okay? And so we'll start with Jim. Jim, would you like to kick off?
Jim Mueller, if you'd like to come up at the table, it'd be great. We'd share a microphone with you and get you in the middle of us. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me be the first to litter the table. I'll do that as quickly as I can. I have to also leave early, so the advantage is I can litter the table and then not be around for the yes buts or the no because, that sort of thing. I'll leave that to you all. But I did have an opportunity to write down some thoughts that relate to consumer contact we've had since the RERC started back in 2001. And let me, in no particular order, but hopefully related, let me share a few things. We've talked with people a bit about how they use social media in emergency situations, and I know that's an issue too. I think in the future, somehow we need to figure out a way to manage that bandwidth. The idea of a person making a phone call to 911 is giving way to multiple people in a situation, giving their viewpoints on all about one event, including visuals, and then as we move further, probably video on and the capability of offering commentary on a situation. So the information that pours in about an emergency event is becoming richer and more diverse, and obviously in some cases contradictory. I think we need to figure out a way to manage that. A little bit earlier, there was a comment about some things. I think, Paul, you might have mentioned it about a bouquet that came out, was it 30 years ago? And there are many examples of that, of technologies that have been around that consumers didn't find. Maybe the need was there, but it didn't go anywhere. We at the RERC get calls regularly from consumers who are asking, what device should I get that will enable me to do such and such? And we'll ask them what device they currently have, and we say, well, your device will do that. And they're shocked. We walk them through how to work it, and they say, okay, great. We wonder how many of those situations there are out there. So I think as we move forward, we need to think about that concept of just because we build it, it doesn't mean they'll come. And it doesn't mean that they don't want to come. It doesn't mean that that isn't a well-defined need. It's that customers are overwhelmed. And the system for supporting their technical awareness is not robust enough, I guess I would say. We think in terms also of where people are going to be in their lives in the next 10 to 15 years. And you don't have to read too much mainstream media to know that those of us who are lucky enough are going to get older. And as a colleague of mine once said, you know, you get older and you get older and eventually you're old. We are, during that process, of course, we all change in our abilities and limitations, but one thing that doesn't seem to change is that we all want to have the opportunity to live the way we want and where we want. That doesn't seem to ever change. So what we see is that people are becoming not as interested in independent living as interdependent living. And this goes for elders who want to have more, not less, contact with their children and grandchildren. They want to do things with them. They're not as interested in technologies and services that make them completely separate, that separate them from their families, but activities and needs that bring the family closer together. And I think that's what we're going to have to do with technology in the future. Specifically related to 911 services, I get the feeling that we're headed towards the technological equivalent of the overcrowded hospital room, the emergency room, where we have real emergencies and we also have less emergencies, those lesser emergencies that really don't require you to be in the ER, but because that's what's close by, or that's what's familiar to you, or culturally that's what you're trained to go after, you wind up there. And we don't want, we want to somehow, and I'm just tossing this out on the table because it's really not an emergency service, but it's a step away from that. How can we enable consumers to use the resources that are available to them to address those emergencies that are not 911 emergencies? That's going to be education, of course. It's going to also involve giving them informational and other tools to use that interdependent network that they both want and need. I had a couple other comments I wanted to share too. Thank you for bearing with me. Another concept that came up just this week at the multiple conferences, including the RESNA conference up in Toronto, as we look at wireless technologies and the technologies that border on them, consumers are beginning to realize that pretty much whatever you can imagine, you can have, and there are other things that people are imagining on behalf of people with disabilities, those of us aging into them as well as those of us who are developing them in other ways. Those technologies are becoming more and more capable. As that happens, there was this sense, especially at this conference where you had consumers and developers together, that consumers are saying, I want more of this, and I want more of that, and I want to know about them, and I want to have easy access and economical access to all these things. But then there comes a point where the technology is so capable, it's more capable than the individual, and begins to erode the individual's own sense of choice of what they want to do and what they can do, and what things they ought to be able to do to retain the abilities that they have. In other words, don't have technology that's monitoring them so closely, whether in an emergency situation or a near emergency situation, that pulls the choice away from the individual to decide whether this is an emergency and who do I want to contact. So I think as technology gets more and more sophisticated and our bandwidth improves, we need to be really careful to allow individuals to retain that level of choice and control, because it's especially critical among those of us who develop limitations, because we generally tend to lose control anyway, and we want to maintain as much as we can. So I call that connected and in control by choice. But to just summarize, I think we need to be aware of this concept of technological triage, where we want to avoid the overloading of the emergency system by somehow enabling consumers to handle those issues that are maybe emergencies to them, but not 911 kind of emergencies. That borders on this concept of interdependent living, that they are able to access the assistance that they need that is just short of a 911 emergency through their own networks, family, friends, and neighbors. And finally, this idea of not just building it and expecting them to come. We're going to really need to address this issue of how do we enable consumers to be their own best friends, to find the information that they need about what's available to them and then make the choice that works best for them. I'm throwing those things out on the table, and I would love to sit and debate with them, but thank you very much.
Please stay at the table with us. We appreciate it.
Just a few more minutes.
Okay, you have to leave.
Thanks, Cheryl.
I have Greg Schumacher on the hand-raising tool. So, Greg?
Yes, this is Greg Schumacher from Addis. In that presentation, there's reference to the use of social media as a tool for emergency access. And that seems to change the whole concept of what 911 is today. Right now, 911, the concept is that either the person who's involved with the incident or somebody who's witnessing in local the incident reports it to the 911 system, determines the most appropriate access point, PSAP, to deal with that. Yet with social media today, that person that communicates with the PSAP could be located anywhere around the world. And so does that change an assumption about what is 911 for this type of community?
Thank you. I'm going to just be careful here. We're talking about the need of 911. You raised the need of 911 to be able to triage incoming contacts to really determine when something's life-threatening or significant threat to property. I think people have agreed that's the first level. And there's other things developing. I would like to see if we give an opportunity for consumer participation here. We have many people. Brad, you indicated that you had some points that you wanted to raise regarding to the needs of your constituents, and I know there's some folks here from various organizations of the deaf. Can we hear from Brad? Do you have anything you want to add?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if I'm on the hand-raising utility or not. I thought I had my hand up there. I have a few items here. Mine are a little shorter, and I apologize. I'm using my screen reader from home here today. In my blue sky, I will not be forced to abandon my current method of contacting 911 if I find it satisfactory. I will be able to use my preferred mobile access device to contact 911 and to do so at no additional cost. My method of contacting 911 services will provide the same options and features as similar methods for the non-disabled. I will be able to configure my preferred system to reveal or disclose to 911 information about my disability which I chose to disclose in an automated manner. When using equipment or methods which are not my own, a consistent and universal technique to invoke accessibility features will be available to me. And the method of contacting 911 and other services will provide all necessary location information which is required. And I have a note that that's particularly important when we are traveling or in unfamiliar settings where we're not aware necessarily of address and specific location information. And those are some of the points that I had come up with over the break. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob? Norm?
Is the mic on? This is Bob. This is Bob Mather from Department of Justice. Talking about the blue sky concept, I think a center needs to provide direct access to a multimedia call. Multimedia call could be a host of many things. It could be voice, text, video, data, depending upon the person and their disability, and we need to provide that access, direct access, instead of going through a third party call, a concept that should be considered here.
Yeah, you got it.
That what deaf people use every day for communication could also be used for 911. And that method of communication will change and can change. For example, there are some deaf video callers, and there are some who will use text, SMS, there are some who will use AIM, others will even use Facebook chat. My kids used to have AIM chat, and they said they were no longer interested in using Facebook chat now because they can contact everyone that way, rather they can contact everyone through Facebook. So I think there are two things we need to keep in mind. One is that whatever is used every day should automatically be connected to the 911, and that should be in the background. And perhaps you could go to a different app to access it and to continue the text conversation. And also having GPS information be also provided and available. My second thought, I just had, and it, anyway, I'm hopefully that will come up at a later time.
Joel again, someone else?
Richard Ray on the handle. Richard?
Yes, hi. This is Richard here. I just wanted to inform the point for social network and social media. I wanted to let you know that the national emergency number, they're working on a paper right now for social networking called the social network, what is it exactly? The 911 PSAP, and the contact person is to develop and prioritize and for the operation run the technology from there. The people who use 911, they're going to develop, or the people developing the paper for the 911 service. The operations and the technical community, the technical committee, sorry, will be providing the information, and they will talk with the NEA headquarters. And I will talk with them and let them know as they release the information.
This is Cheryl King. Richard, do you have any idea when that NENA document will be available?
Well, as of today, the paper, the document is being drafted, and it's under review by two different groups, two different committees, the technical committee and the operational committee. And I'm not sure when they're going to have it open for people to discuss for the general public. The NENA headquarters gets the information first, and then they'll inform you.
Thank you, Richard.
That's on my list of things to do.
Joel Zev again. Norman, you wanted to put some other points on? You remembered them?
Yes, I do. This is Norman, and this is an important point. The issue of practice and test. That is an important function for deaf people because we do not want to have 911 only. It be a system that we may forget how to use. We want to be able to contact a place where we can test it, to make sure that I'm getting the location right, to make sure that I'm communicating with 911 and it's going through. So if and when an emergency does come up, that they will able to use it appropriately. And also voice calls for 911. That should not be a practice test only. There should be other ways of practicing. So I think it's important to have the function and practice tests to make sure that they're operational.
Joel Zev again. Just comment on that. I'm really concerned and was amazed by the limitations placed upon incoming text messages for a constituency that uses text messaging almost 80–90% of the time in their personal communications, not to have the 911 centers able to accept text for an emergency, when this is the prime mode of communication, shocked me when I found out how few of the centers actually will accept a text call. We are required to accept TTY, but nobody uses TTY. Why can't we switch over to text in replacing that mandate for TTY? Just a point that I was very surprised at sitting at the table over the last couple of months listening to that. I was stunned by that. Anybody else have input on the consumer side? Okay, Mark, you have something?
Mark Fletcher. Mark Fletcher with Avaya. It is not the PSAP technology necessarily that is at fault for the lack of text messaging. The primary problem is the network today and the way 911 telephone calls are designed to traverse the network. A text message is not a phone call. And agencies that have accommodated texting to 911 have done so through what I view as proprietary one-off mechanisms that fool the public into believing that there is a technology available that really isn't there. What they've done is a cool little technological trick with smoke and mirrors. In my opinion, it's not scalable, deployable across multiple carriers, or across multiple centers. What's needed is a retrofitting of the existing 911 network to be a next generation 911 network that's capable of IP-based multimedia data packets. That is the only network that will enable voice, video, text, email, SMS, or any other technology that's yet to be invented. And until we get past the network blockade, we're not going to fix the text problem into 911, into the center. But it's the network that's at fault.
I just have to ask Joel Zev again, just a question on that. Is that one of Greg's 5-year, 10-year, 15-year blue sky to be able to implement that? Is that short term, 2 years out? Where does it fall?
Mark Fletcher, we see RFPs as a manufacturer. Avaya has over 50% of the PSAPs in the U.S. today. The RFPs that we see coming out every single week include next generation 911. A good majority of them actually specify the NENA i3 next generation 911, which is yet to be officially promulgated by NENA. I say next generation networks, from what I see of what's being deployed today, will be a reality in the next 6 to 18 months. Once those networks are online, PSAPs can openly connect to them using next generation technology or through gateway technology that bridges the gap to the legacy model. Carriers can do the same, although I don't know of any carrier that wouldn't put in a SIP connection to an existing network. So I would say within 18 months you're going to see a very rapid adoption of this technology, but there are legislative and political battles that have to be promulgated before any of that happens.
Bob from DOJ, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Didn't I remember about 10 years ago the Department of Justice ruled that the incoming TTY call could not be on a separate telephone number? It had to be able to use 911. How does that differ now than then? And why can't what I suggested, the TTY input, be the text message input?
Yes, this is Bob. Just brief history here. Brief background for all of you about the Department of Justice and the rules from 2002, actually. We passed a requirement for all of the 911 centers to provide, quote, direct access to users that have TTYs. And at that time, we found that the TRS was, the use of that was not effective for emergencies. So then we all had to establish emergency equipment for calls. At that time, it was a standalone situation. And we went to the NENA conference and talked to the different vendors and agencies about the 911 services and asked them if they had TTY capabilities in their centers. And some of them seemed a little bit surprised and didn't understand what it was. Now we see that all of them have the capability to have access to TTYs. All 911 centers have TTY capability. But of course, that was 10 years ago. So now we're at the next generation stage. And we just issued last summer the ANPRM, the Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. We've asked for comments from the public. What should be considered for direct access related to the NG 911, Next Generation 911? What does direct access mean? Is this video calls? Is it text? What is it? So we're asking for your ideas. Also, we're asking the question about these 911 centers, what kind of technology do they currently have? And what will happen in the next 5 years? What can we set up? How can we make this accessible with the Next Generation 911? People are using mobile devices of what type? What are we using? How can we make this? We're still analyzing all of our comments that we received.
Thank you. Joel, Zeb, anyone else want to have input on the consumer side of what the needs are and how to address those needs and what you think should happen in the future? Paul?
This is Paul Michaelis with Avaya. I just wanted to add to what Mark Fletcher said. In addition to being a major supplier of PSAP equipment, Avaya, I think, is probably the largest manufacturer of contact center equipment in the United States. So, for example, if you're calling into a bank to get to an agent there, you're calling into your insurance company, they're probably using our equipment. Along those lines, that is a much, much, much bigger market for us than PSAPs. What we're finding more and more is RFPs, requests for proposals, coming in especially from financial services organizations, asking us to TTY enable their agents. The motivator here is that the people who use TTYs do not feel comfortable, many of them do not feel comfortable working through a relay service to provide confidential information such as their account number and password and so on, how much money they have in their accounts. And it is that economic pressure from the deaf community that is resulting in the RFPs looking for direct connectivity for their deaf customers. So it's not a matter of regulatory compliance that's motivating this. It's a matter of the economics of the deaf community wanting to have direct contact with the bank's employees. And where I'm going with this is that as part of the blue sky discussion, I would encourage you to think about capabilities that you would like that would be of benefit in, for example, a financial services organization or a healthcare organization. That as soon as we start seeing RFPs from those large Avaya customers looking for the sort of capabilities you want, it's going to happen. So again, as part of the blue sky discussion, think about capabilities you might like to have outside of the 911 arena that might be persuasive to our large customers so that they'll write RFPs asking for this stuff.
I don't know who was first.
Okay, go on. Christopher?
This is Chris Littlewood. I just wanted to make a quick comment on what was said about the comfort of a customer calling a financial institution with the use of a relay service. From a few cases I've heard about or been involved with in the state of Florida, it's not so much been a problem with the customer's comfort level as it has been the financial institution's comfort level. And that people that want to make calls to banks or financial organizations or insurance companies that are using a relay service are not able to do that because the banks or financial services won't talk through a relay service, and that's the bigger problem.
Bob? Oh, I'm sorry. You want to do it?
No, we had, no, go ahead, no, it's okay. Arnold was second, and then Bob.
I'm sorry.
Paul, I apologize. Arnold, then Bob.
Okay. My name is Arnold van Wijk, and I'm from the Real-Time Tech Task Force. And we are now sometimes discussing about comfort and about tech communication. I want to make something very clear what's happening. If you are talking about tech communication at this moment, most of us are used to text messaging, SMS, and mobile phones, and chatting instant messaging. And I want to show you, we also have real-time text, and some of you have heard about it and seen the examples of it. But real-time text, it's something that can do much more than what text messaging can. While both ways of text communication is great, but if we want to have a more direct communication, the real-time text is benefiting more directly, because if somebody is texting you using real-time text, you can actually read it quite quickly what the person is already typing about. You don't need to wait until the person is finished his text and sent using enter. But you can follow it. And it's very similar in the same way as we are talking with each other. If you say, hello, how are you? You are getting it almost immediately as I'm saying. So use real-time text is talking by text. And a lot of people are pushing and put a lot of effort in text messaging, but everybody who is using real-time text at the same time agree that real-time text is closer to conversation. And I'm using quite a lot of text messaging as well, but also depends on the situation that I'm communicating with other people, if we want to text messaging in chat or real-time text. So when I'm in a hurry and really need to get a hold of a person, I prefer real-time text. And in case of an emergency call or a service call for a bank or other things, I want to have a delay in communication minimal. So I want to have it immediately receive it what the other person is typing. I want the other person to get it what I am talking about as well, without waiting for each other. And so we have two different kinds of text communication, and I want to stress everybody to keep both systems in mind. Depending on the situation, one is easier and nicer, and some people might prefer it. Depending on other situations, you might prefer the real-time text. And it's the same thing that I'm telling to a lot of people. You don't use a fork to eat soup. So don't force deaf people who prefer real-time text to eat soup with a fork. Just use a spoon for the moment you need a spoon, and a fork for the moment you need a fork. And that is what I want to convey to people. And also about what Avaya is saying, we are not talking about technology that is far ahead in the future. It is something that is possible now. And a lot of call centers can implement it. But we need people to actually be aware about it and ask for it. Because I'm asking for it. but I'm not a really big, powerful person who can say, I want to happen now. I need a lot of people to join each other. And then another advantage of real-time text is, what I really like, is I can combine it with video. So that's just called it total conversation. Now, if you want to sign language as first language, there's always a moment that you don't understand each sign, or it gets a bit too dark. Then you want to type the specific word into it. If you do use a text messaging, it might take additional delay for it. So it's about the need for what consumers need is direct communication, and hope people be aware that you have both text messaging, real-time text, and you can implement it in emergency networks now, and the service network for banks, for everything at this moment. So if it's not possible, please tell me then why it's not possible. And if you have specific questions about it, about real-time text, and why it's so important, just grab me. Thank you.
Bob, you had a comment?
Yes. Am I on? I just want to throw out another idea here, brainstorming as we are. Relayed calls. What are relayed calls? There are two legs to a relay call. The first leg is from the actual caller, the originator, to a center, and then the center then would call the end user or the person who is receiving the call. There seems to be more push now for direct access, as I said before. It's really becoming a funding issue, I believe. I think we need to really redefine the word relayed and allow direct calls to financial institutions, to the centers, to the relay, wherever, to interpreting services, wherever it needs to go. Just another idea to throw out there on the table.
Mark? Mark?
This is Mark Stern from Purple. To add to Bob's comments, I think we focus too much on the connection between the consumer and the PSAP, and I think we should expand the scope to include the actual first responders that come to the scene. Because, for example, right now, we're struggling with VRS when it calls the PSAP and tries to explain the situation, and the ambulance or the police or the fire truck arrives, and there's no communication access for the deaf person there on site. And so when the first responder arrives during the VRS call, we'll help interpret that call, but once we're disconnected from the PSAP, they're on their own. So I just think we need to expand the scope to include the emergency itself, not just the connection to the PSAP.
This is Cheryl King. Mark, the point is well taken, but that is out of the scope of this advisory committee. That is an area that we should work with FEMA and DHS about, and also the national associations of the various first responders. It is an issue that is before them and various conferences that I've attended over the years, but it's beyond the scope of us here. We're just consumer to the PSAP.
But again, this is a blue sky discussion.
Yes, but let's keep it productive on what we have a scope for.
Do you have anybody on the?
Yeah, Gunnar is on the hand-raising tool. Gunnar?
Yeah, thanks. Do you hear me now, or before I was very silent?
Sound good.
Do you hear me? Sounds good. Okay. I'm on the same line as, in fact, as Mark, that I want to go a bit deeper into the handling of the call and make sure that, firstly, we have the chance for the user to use a call with any mix of media, video for sign language or for showing the scene, or audio for talking, or conveying audio from the scene, text, real-time text or messaging, whatever the user is most used to, and take all these media all the way in through the handling of the call to the PSAP first, to the dispatchers, then possibly to the dispatch unit on the way to the place, having a conversation with the user along the way if that's needed for medical reasons. So maintain the media connection while we are in the blue sky, and let's hear the buts later. So that's my comment.
Joel Zev, I think you're walking into a room with lots of issues that are way beyond, as Cheryl indicated, the scope of our relationship with the FCC and our recommendations that we're supposed to be drafting for that. I think incredibly valid point, but I don't believe, and I agree with Cheryl, that it's just well beyond anything we could talk about here or solve. Maybe DOJ, it may be FEMA, there's all kinds of other places, but you can't have every meeting covering everything. I'd like to bring us back a little bit, if we can. There's a significant constituency out there that's emerging and growing every day with the baby boomers aging out that are homebound. When we did the survey, I tried to get elderly people who had sensory impairments and other issues to fill out the survey, but they don't come to senior centers. And they don't participate in programs of which we have normal access to and are not involved in the AARP as active members. But there's a larger number there. Many of those have significant hearing loss, and we know that. Many of those have other significant disabilities that still need, probably more than anyone else, access to 911. I think we really, I'd like to see if we can spend some time on focusing on the low-tech, skill level people who really don't have it in terms of they don't have a cell phone, they don't have all this other equipment right now, so they're not discussing text, they're discussing, they need 911. They need someone there right away because I've fallen and I can't get up, or I'm having a stroke, or there's a fire in my apartment, I guess a lot of calls are made this way to 911, I'm lonesome. That's an actual large number of calls to some of the 911 centers that I've heard, but there's not a lot you can do about that. Is there any comment just on low-tech connection, low-tech thoughts that we can bring to the fore to make it enabling general access to 911 for people who are not tech savvy at this stage? That may change in 20 years. Everybody will have skill, but right now, and we're leading into a new population that are going to be homebound, more people are staying home, more people are frail, staying home, not in nursing homes because of expenses. What do we do?
Joel, this is Brett Hodges. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was having some phone issues here. That reflects back to a couple of the items that I mentioned earlier in my comments. And the first of those is that I should not be able to be forced to abandon a device, and at the same time, there are programs out there. In fact, it's interesting. I'm normally not home during the day, but the commercials you watch during daytime TV during the break, there were, in the hour break, 3 separate ads for the government-subsidized cell phone service here in West Virginia. I presume it's a nationwide program for people who meet certain income requirements, Medicare and Medicaid among them. We know at AFB that these devices are in themselves not accessible. So I think we start by requiring that government programs that provide infrastructure or technology to end users provide that infrastructure and technology in a manner that is accessible to all who would use it, to all of the citizens who ultimately have paid for it.
Go ahead, Greg, and then have Bernard on.
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo the need to focus back on the low tech. We talk about some people saying, well, they have special apps on phones that they can use for this or that. This is Greg Vanderheiden, Trade Center, sorry. And as was pointed out earlier, many people don't have any idea what the functions of their phones are that are the standard ones, much less the fact that there might be some secret special feature someplace. When people, especially the very large portion of the population actually, that is not super tech savvy, that's not the ones who are setting the rules, not the ones that are sitting at the table, etc., want to call 911, they are not only going to use that thing which they use every day, but they're going to use it in the exact same way they use it every day. And we talk about that that's important because in an emergency, you don't think of doing things differently, you just do them the regular way. But for many of these people, even if they had lots of time to think about it, they wouldn't know of any other way to use it besides that which is used every day. So I think we need to really try to think about how this is going to be. Now, it was talked about before that calling anywhere else besides 911 is outside the scope of this committee, and it is. But we need to remember that in an emergency, people may call 911 and then have to call the school and then have to call the neighbor and then have to do something back again. And to ask that when they call 911, they use something totally different than they just used to call the school to do something else is also not realistic. You also, in many crises, you'll call 911 and you just don't get through. And so you start trying to call other places and to say, oh, well, when you do 911, you do it this way, and then when that fails, you have to go get another device, or you have to put it into a different mode, or you have to do anything different. So I think all of these things speak to the fact that when we go to 911, unless we are talking about very with it, tech-savvy people who have all their wits about them, we are really going to have to be talking about what is the way that people are going to communicate. And the only piece I want to add to the end of that is to echo another comment that was made earlier, and that is the way we usually communicate every day is changing. For some people, it will be the same way they've communicated for the last 10 years, but for other people, it's changing so that people their everyday communication is changing into new forms. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see even many more different types of communication being the way. The comment was made earlier that the children, you used to use AIM, but now they all use Facebook, and so they don't even use AIM ever. So I think as we go forward, and I want to hear as we move to the next stage of future and stuff like this, if people can try to talk about what are all the ways that we think that people might be communicating every day, and how can we make it, this is going to be a challenge for the third part, the but part, if people are really communicating every day, not any one person, but all of the different people, in 10, 15 different ways. The but is going to be, how do we design an emergency system without requiring that every PSAP support 15 different ways of communication, which is unrealistic. So let's, as we move to the future, talk about what we see as some of the different ways and what are some of the paths we may see for diversity, and then as we go forward, any ideas people have for bringing them back together again so that they don't look like a million different things to the PSAPs, which is unrealistic. Thank you.
Just jumping around, Norm would like to respond to that, and then I still want to go to Bernard. I haven't forgotten you're next in the queue, and then Arnold. Cheryl.
I agree with Greg. What we do on a daily basis, yes, I agree, and this is Norm speaking. But from my point of view, there are two habits. If you're calling to another deaf person, you use it in a certain approach or method. Maybe it's an IM to a text or a video call to that individual. And if I'm calling to a voice user, then I use a different method, like relay apps. And those are the two habits I have. So if I make voice calls, I use that app for that. And it could be a text, it could be IM, it could even be a video call. And I'm sorry to say, if a deaf person makes a 911 call and thinks voice first, then that means that they're going to call through the relay app. That's what's a natural instinct, because that's what we do on a daily basis. And so they're going to rely on relay for making a 911 call, and that's because it's a force of habit. Do you all agree?
This is Cheryl. I think that's an excellent point, Norm.
All right. Bernard?
This is Brett Hodges, AFB. May I pose a question?
Yes.
This is a fascinating issue, Norm. Is that perceived as a negative or less desirable scenario by the deaf community by virtue of having to go through another party, or by virtue of the relay not working very well much of the time?
This is Norm. Deaf people have no other choice. You know, I've never practiced or never actually had any experience with a direct call to 911. And so deaf people would rather go through the relay because that's something they have experience with. They've never actually tested it or done anything with a direct call to 911, so they're not confident that it would work. So if there is going to be another method, then it needs to be tested to make sure that it will work. And so when an emergency does occur, that we have that option in place. But as of right now, that option doesn't exist.
Thank you. Bernard?
Yeah. There have been a number of things which have come up in this discussion that I think are worth noting. One is the issue of complexity and the potential impact that could have on usability. And a lot of that depends on the implementation, and one can conceive of good implementations and bad implementations. But I think it is something to keep in mind, because today's implementation, warts and all, is relatively simple. And it's something we need to keep in mind, whether the potential alternatives would in fact be complex and how that will interact with the user base. The other thing I think it's worth keeping in mind is overall cost. Particularly as the population ages, solutions which bring with them large monthly fees or large upfront costs could potentially be problematic. Again, no matter what you think of the current system, it does deliver universal 911 service, potentially even if you don't have, if you have a non-service initialized device. And the other thing that it does is, in general, will deliver location pretty much no matter where you are. And so there are a number of characteristics of the existing system that I think we want to keep while solving a bunch of the issues that we're seeing. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that we don't really get to influence the implementation that much in this group, but we do get to influence potentially the protocols. And those can be implemented in ways that are usable or ways that are unusable. And there's not necessarily a lot we can do about that, although we can hope that they're implemented in ways that make sense.
Thank you, Bernard. Arnold and Cheryl.
Okay, Arnold van Wijk. But I do notice I never had the experience of calling an emergency number. I'm glad to have it. But there are two situations that you call emergency number. The first is something happened to you, help, I need help. You're on fire, you are in a crash, or burglars are burglarizing your home, so you are in panic. Then you might lose a lot of things you do. You need just communicating. The other situation is you're witnessing, directly or indirectly, an emergency. You're much calmer, maybe more calculated, they can use the communication device. So now I want to use the blue sky part. I want to launch a rocket and go a little bit further into the blue part, maybe into space. Technology is already possible. If something happens to me, I will have a lot of impact, a lot of G-forces on me. Or some part of the clouds might burn, or my mobile phone might drop, or my hearing aids, or whatever. So why not have these devices be able to monitor anything out of the usual, some acceleration, temperature-wise, different in heart beating if you have in a watch, and depend on the combination of it, knowing, okay, there's an emergency, and send it to the emergency center. And then it's up to the emergency center to determine if something is unusual going on, or you just forgot to put the clothes away or whatever. Now, I think that is something more in the future. That people can sense, your system can sense actually when something happens to you. I think that's more in the future. And then calling directly as a person is more as an observer to help, or as additional information if the emergency is not so urgent. That is what I think is going to be in the future. Maybe we should focus on that as near future thing to happen. So.
This is Cheryl King. Brad Hodges, I would like to go back to your most recent comment. You said that you had seen commercials about the government programs for telephone service. Are you?
Yes, Cheryl.
Okay. I'm wondering if that was Lifeline or LifeLink kind of programs that you might have been referring to?
No, these are evidently underwritten or subsidized cell phone services that are provided for folks on low income, typically in the $240 a minute a month range. And they provide a basic cell phone to folks, and you have the option of accepting that, or for a few dollars you can include a texting program and some more minutes. And my point was to kind of complement Greg Vanderheyden's perspective on low tech and things people have and use. My point is that I think it's really important that we make sure that the technology and the systems, particularly as purchased and provided by government, meet the expectations for accessibility to begin with.
Right. This is Cheryl, and that's exactly why I wanted to revisit this issue, because those telephones they should be accessible under Section 255.
That's been our perspective for some time, Cheryl, but
right.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So I would certainly be interested in following up on that and see what the program is, and
sure.
The whole issue of deciding what's accessible is an individual matter. So your point is well taken, but my other hat that I wear a lot of the time here at the Commission is certainly interested in following up on that.
Yeah,
to the point of, yes, those the programs that are free to the consumer that are funded by or subsidized by the federal government have multiple requirements for accessibility.
Thank you.
I think Greg, Phil, did you want to comment to that, Greg? And then I'm going to get over to Mark, and then Richard, Ray, and then Gunnar.
Hello. So to that point, and I think, this is Greg Fields, by the way, I think Cheryl made a good point, because there's different degrees of accessibility for different needs. The phone that was referenced actually is the Jitterbug, which we all know, which has the highest hack rating in industry, one of the largest sets of buttons used by persons with hearing impairments, glaucoma, seniors, those who are new to phones. So in many, many ways, it is quite accessible. But to Brad's point, there is no built-in key echo or support for blind users' access, except for spatial memory of the keys. But for other users, it is quite accessible.
All right.
Thank you.
Mark Fletcher?
Mark Fletcher with Avaya. Regarding the points that Greg Vanderheyden raised as far as multiple forms of communication, in the past we looked at public safety answer points as marginally connected islands. In the future, with an emergency services IP network in place, the functionality can now be delivered in what we call in the industry in a hosted model, whether that's a corporation providing a service, a city, county, or state consolidating services, and then delivering that to the PSAP. What's happening is the call taker positions now become less intelligent as we put more intelligence in the core of the network. And my point being that if tomorrow a new form of communication arose, it could be easily deployed across a large number of call taker positions because of a hosted model type build out, and not having to integrate and upgrade 20,000 answering positions. That could be significantly reduced. But again, looking at the hosted model and progression towards an Ethernet backbone for public safety. Thank you.
I have you up there, Joel, but I have Richard, Ray, Gunnar, and then Joel. Richard?
Oh, it's my turn. Okay. Are you asking me or Joel? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. If I'm able to go back to the point related to that Norman said, when the users call 911, the point that needs to be said is that the call is recorded as voice also. Right now, the recording is the interpreter's voice. So it's important to know and include the video phone user on the recording. And so they're able to play back and save that if the user needs that recording for whatever reason. No, it's something to consider.
Thank you, Richard. Gunnar, Joel, and then Henning.
Yeah, Gunnar Hellström here. I want to get back into the blue sky and say that a user wants to be approached efficiently in the way that they are used to communicate, so that the system knows their profile, their way of communication, so that you don't need to have hassle about, is it sign language, is it Spanish accent, is it Chinese, whatever, must be a preparation in the PSAP to handle properly. So, profiles filled with your desires, and also U.S. citizens want to be properly handled while they are traveling, wherever in the world. If they are in India, they still need to have a chance to call emergency. And this is a more tricky thing with disabled people because of the extra languages and modes that need to be invoked. Still, there is a need. And same with visitors in USA. If they know that they have a good system at home, they want to visit USA and be able to call their emergency services or have a good relation between 911 and whatever their home emergency service is to be handled properly. There is a much higher complication with handling this for disabled people, with a possible translation or so that needs to be brought in, even if you have direct access, so that the PSAP see and hear and read everything between the user and the PSAP. There might be a need for interpreters to be brought in as well. About the multiplicity that Greg brought up, that we must allow everybody to use the way of communication that they use every day, and we must not require the PSAPs or emergency services to implement 80 types of communication private. We instead need to have every service provider to provide interfaces according to the standards to 911, so that, and make it as equal as possible. Have something like 911 in the address that everybody, whatever communication system they are sitting on, can remember and call. If there is some domain part in the address that they usually use, they should be allowed to attach that so that they feel exactly at home when they are doing their 911 call in whatever communication system. And it's service providers' task to convert to the very few methods that are used by the emergency services. That's the way to handle that kind of multiplicity. So, my comments. Thanks.
Joel Zev. I just want to follow up on that, and I think that what I've heard, and I'm just summarizing, I think where we are right now, that everyone would like to be able to maintain the caller being able to use any method, a wide variety of methods based upon their disability, their needs, their choices, their comfort level, what they can use. A senior who can use a little phone or whatever it is. The challenge is on the hosting of it, that it has to come into a center and being interpreted and then delivered as simply as possible to the call taker to get the necessary information to do what they do in getting support services. So I think where we are is that we have to be looking at a system that can use or accept anything with a wide variety of input, massage it in a call center before it goes to the call taker with basic data. Is that what everyone is saying? I think I've heard that from Mark. I've heard that from many people. I don't know if that's possible. That's what Blue Sky is about. But I think we have to allow that so we're not specifying to the sender of the information, who maybe their first 911 call might be 10 years from now. What are they going to use? Can't dictate that. Whatever they are comfortable with using, let that happen, and then let the center handle it, massage it, make it into a simple form. It's for the call taker. Greg?
May I comment?
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to also remember is that in the past, we had think of the relay, and somebody had alluded to this earlier. We think of the relay as something that's like a chain. I call the relay calls the 911. With IP, there's no need for it to use that model, actually. We can use basically what amounts to as a conference call model. Once you have an IP line, you can have any number of channels, if you will, coming and going. So you can have it so that the person who is making the call is talking to the relay center and an interpreter or a 911 center and an interpreter or relay center, whatever you want to call it, but it's not really in a relay fashion. We can have in parallel with direct communication any other supports that we need. So I think this is one important thing that we need to kind of get through our heads, is that we should think of interpreters, et cetera, being in a conference call situation rather than in a chain where they stand between you and the 911. Instead, they stand beside you, or they stand beside the 911 operator while you're communicating with them. And this is an important thing to sort of communicate to the community as we're moving forward so we can get engagement on that. The other one is the comment where we want to be able to handle this diverse. One thing that I've heard so many times today, again, is what you had brought up, and that is that people are going to want to communicate to the 911 centers in different forms, and different people have what is, quote, normal. Some of them will be very legacy, and some of them will be very much on the other end. And we can't discriminate against either group. We can't say, well, to call 911, you have to be communicated completely differently than you do every day. It just isn't going to work, especially for people that are not multitask or communicators. We can, and somebody got to this, when it comes into the center, we can put something at the edge of the centers that can take lots of different forms in and convert it into one form, which then gets distributed about in the center. So we could have something that will take 911 and 3 kinds of text or whatever, and it can make it into one form, which then comes into the center. So the center has a voice channel, a text channel, and a video channel, and they don't actually have to deal with the fact that many kinds of text, many kinds of voice, et cetera, actually hit their outer periphery. And one of the challenges as we go forward will be to say, that's an easy thing to say for large 911 centers, but how does that work for the 911 center, which is 2 or 3 people sitting in a room off on the edge of Timbuktu? They're not going to have this big multimedia processing center. They have a couple phone lines, TTY, sitting on a table in a room. So we need to be thinking about how we're going to make these types of systems work across the full spectrum. Part of that, I think, is we can talk in this committee about what we think should happen, and then other people technically are going to be able to say, how to make that happen. But I think that that's one of the things that we should be thinking about as we go forward. 2 other things just to note about the future. We will, in the not very distant future, be able to know within a few feet, including vertically, which is important. In other words, in 3 space. Right now, we have GPS, and it tells you where you are, but if you're in a 24-story or 50-story or 100-story building, knowing your latitude and longitude is not much use without knowing what floor you're on. But there are techniques that allow you to put essentially little tags that cost literally pennies everywhere. You could put one on every doorpost in a building, and anything that's near any of them will know that it's near that tag. And that tag can very easily and very quickly will be registered in a database, so that anytime you are anywhere in any structure, you will know within not very many feet exactly where you are, or at least the device you're carrying can. And that will be coming for a whole bunch of commercial reasons, not for 911 reasons. And it doesn't tell anybody else where you are, but you will know where you are. With that, combined with the ability outside to know where you are within 10 feet or less, this gives us a whole new location capability that we just don't have today. And so this is something we ought to be putting into our thoughts in terms of how we can use that kind of accuracy of location. And the final thing, nope, we already covered the other aspects that I wanted to touch on. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Henning, then Matt Gerst, and Norm.
Yeah, this is Henning. I just wanted to kind of loop back to 2 points that were made. One is the general sensor ideas that have come up in a few minutes ago, I think it illustrates the idea that there would be sensors on your body or in your home, for example, that would detect abnormal things that would indicate typically a medical, or in some cases, another emergency, such as, let's say, fumes or carbon monoxide or something like that. We will probably see a lot more of those, but for, I think, financial reasons, I'm guessing that we'll have to at least get used to the idea that many of those will not directly go to 911 simply because the false positive rate, the false alarm rate is high, and from what I understand, others who have more direct operational experience, existing alarm interfaces to PSAPs, let's say there's at least a subset of PSAPs that are very reluctant to deal with alarms. Indeed, from what we've been told in another proceeding is that there are states that rule out 911 calls from third parties that are not directly are not eyewitnesses to the emergency, and sensors would be presumably wouldn't be a human originated call in that sense. So we have to think a bit broader than just simply the 911 system. There will be a number of entities that will have to interface with the system, medical monitoring services, various private type of service, telematic services, all of which need to be able to provide equivalent service and the ability to handle media of a variety of forms beyond just the typical voice call as it's happening today. And they need to be integrated into the system so that they can deal with their clients who may have disabilities of various sorts. The second item, I think, which this may have been discussed previously, but I think there's a bit of a confusion going on when we talk about media, because we're really talking about, and varieties, that we're really talking somewhat at two different layers. Namely, one is kind of the protocols and encodings and all of those, and the other one is just the media modalities visible to the user. And the notion that we should have all available ones for the latter, I think, is non-controversial. What is less clear and has serious reliability implications is the ability for PSAPs to support all technologies reliably, simply because you wouldn't know ahead of time whether your proprietary new whatever Mac client or app that you have on your smartphone will connect to a particular PSAP, or can be forwarded to other PSAPs that may need to handle a call under overload conditions. So that's where, generally speaking, there has been the notion of all media types, but not all media protocols, as kind of a guiding principle to the overall design of the system, just to keep it manageable and reasonably reliable, so that you don't suddenly get into the "oops, I thought it would work" category, or it worked 2 weeks ago, but well, it was really a different PSAP you were talking to at that point.
Thank you. Matt Gerst?
Matt Gerst with CTIA. Thanks. I want to say, first of all, that this has been very helpful and really interesting discussion, and I have two comments. The first is that I think Joel brought up a number of points about whether text can be currently utilized for 911 communication, and just wanted to remind the group that there's been a number of studies, particularly within the FCC with the CISRIC 4B working group. There have been a number of external studies, and I hope that as this group goes forward, that we consider those studies and look to them and compare the results that came out of those studies and recommendations to what the survey that we're looking at today, how those all fit together, because I think that's part of the core task here. As far as the Blue Sky is concerned, this has been very, very helpful. I have one question, though, because I think Greg and Mark have brought up a really interesting concept about hosting and having IP communications and being able to bring in different elements to the call center so that not everything is housed at the call center or with the call taker. And I wonder, from the consumer representatives, how this impacts your definition of direct access. And because we talked a lot about that, about how we need to have direct access to 911. And I think that's a point well taken. But if we're in this new environment where potentially you're housing things in different parts and maybe it's not directly to the PSAP, but it's to some sort of central server or some sort of central component, and then it's delivered to the PSAP, or then it's, how does that all come into play? Is that, the system that you're envisioning, does that work with what you see in the future of Next Generation 911?
This is Brad Hodges at AFB. I'll jump in if I may. That question provokes a thought, and I hope it's related. I hope my response is substantive. But the larger blue sky question, and maybe it's the cloud in the blue sky, is where do we err? Do we err on the side of robustness and perhaps not provide as much innovation, or do we err on the side of innovation and forgo some robustness? It seems to me that is, something that we've got to think about. Do we want to use technology? This is from the user experience now. Do we want to use technology, a next generation technology, to create a user experience which is not radically different from today's user experience, but is much more robust and reliable? Or are we going to use next generation, or do we anticipate next generation as providing many, perhaps even unrecognizable, new avenues or mechanisms to services? And I think those are two very different things, and I'm hearing that both are important, and I'm a bit conflicted about all of it.
Norm.
This is Norm speaking. So direct access and going through relay, both of those are extremely important. I have an idea I'd like to throw out there. FCC has some controlling over how relays are funded. And I'm thinking of perhaps a hybrid solution. So we'd be able to connect through the relay like we typically have through calls. And then in emergency situation, it would appear as though we're still connecting through the relay, but we would actually be going directly through 911 through SIP. For example, the LTE network could be used simultaneously. So the call would be made 911 the call would be made to the 911 center as well as going through the relay center, and the call would be bridged. There could be an app developed to do that, and there could be standards developed how that would be used, how the bridge would be made from the relay to the 911 call. It seems like that would be a good solution. So an individual would just call the number that they typically call, and there'd be a second leg to the call that would be connected to the 911 center. And then once the connection is made to the 911 center, more data would be added to that, perhaps whether it's video or what other medium is needed. But the idea of having a hybrid app, does that sound like something that could work? What do people think?
Gunnar here, it's my turn now.
We got Dawn and then you, Gunnar. I got Dawn and then you. Dawn. You want to reply?
I'll give up my spot to whomever would like to answer Norman's question, then I'll go after them.
Okay, Gunnar, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah.
Okay, Gunnar, then Dawn.
Okay, Gunnar here. Yes, certainly, Norman. That's the way I see it. When there is a real need for interpreter, and because the deaf user is used to call like when he calls the relay, because he will believe that the PSAP will have all in voice. In both cases, the service will detect that, this is a 911 call, and make special arrangements, connect through the bridge that also Greg talked about, and we have in operation now in Reach 112, the European project. So that's the way. Call as you usually do, but the service takes care of it. It's not really the app, it's the service provider who does this connection. And I think that's fair way. I also wanted to respond on the idea of the multitude. I said that let each service provider of the communication services take care of their conversion into the interface provided by the emergency service network, so that we don't have any big conversion centers will be responsible from some poor organization who can't keep up with all new proprietary services that come along, but rather put requirements on each communication service provider to do the conversion. And this is mainly on the protocol level. We haven't found very many media nodes that are different. It seems to be video, audio, real-time text, and text chat that we are talking about. So convert by the service provider and call in with a standard. Yep, that's mine.
Thank you. Mark Fletcher also wanted to add a comment back to that, so we're still going to come to you, Donna and Bernard.
Thank you. Mark Fletcher with Avaya, thank you. To respond to that, Norman, the Avaya model for next generation 911 includes what we call a persistent, contextual, collaborative conference. We've got to come up with a new acronym. It's in our contract. What it is it's a media server located in the middle of the network. The 911 caller enters into the network, and we park that caller on the media server. At that point, we can take voice, video, picture, text, email, any kind of multimedia communication. The contextual piece of this is we look at all of that information, location, phone numbers, language preference, whatever data may be there, and we select a 911 call taker that is best appropriate to deal with that call. Not only based on location, but based on skills. And then through SIP technology, we invite that call taker to the existing conference. The value is that if suddenly the caller starts speaking Spanish, and the call taker we have assigned cannot speak Spanish, they can immediately secure another call taker in the network ecosystem and bring them to the conference. So it's a completely different way than we have the network engineer today. Today we bring the caller, we put that caller to a call taker, they collect information, they gather data. Quite often the call has to be transferred. That call is transferred. The data is often left behind and has to be recollected. Now we park all the data and the caller and what we call centrally anchor that information. And now we invite the resources that can provide assistance not having to package that data and shuffle it all over the network. And Cheryl, I'd be happy to give a more detailed presentation at a future date when appropriate, so we all have a better opportunity to understand, because as you can imagine, this is difficult to explain with just words, but pictures, I can show you a really amazing concept, and I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
This is Cheryl. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm real intrigued about how they can recognize whether it's a Spanish-speaking call coming in, for instance. So, yeah, we'll certainly get around to that. Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
All right. We're going to now, I skipped on Dawn a few times, but I'm going to go Dawn, Bernard, and I know Greg is third in there. So Dawn, and then Henning I have four.
This is Don Mitchell. Yeah, so I hope it's all right. I know we've been focusing on consumer blue sky. I represent part of the industry, so may I do an industry blue sky? So when I blue sky, I like to think of in terms of ecosystems, and I won't bore you with the technological description of the ecosystem. I'm just going to pull out one part of that ecosystem that's very, very important to us in my company, and I believe is important to the industry in general. And that is in the area of 911, there are handcuffs on our hands for innovation because of the actions of what we call patent trolls, or people who don't produce any goods or services but sit on patents, and then will a lot of times try to impose those IPR, intellectual property rights, even after a government mandate for a service like 911. So at least from my company, I don't know if any other company feels the same way, we would certainly welcome in our blue sky some assistance from the federal government on in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. I have Bernard, Greg, and then Henning.
Yeah. This is Bernard. I'd like to underline the point that was made about the flexibility of implementation in the PSAP. We've done engineering on a number of emergency centers, both public and private, and there's a lot of flexibility in what can be done there. As was mentioned, it's possible to design systems that will distribute the calls, or that will transfer them to the appropriate resource, so that even in some cases we've worked to automate the dispatching based on location and so forth. But I think the important thing for us to focus on here is the basic capabilities which one can use to compose these services. Voice over IP and unified communications inherently thinks of individual capabilities which can be composed and developed in multiple ways. And we talked about a couple of things which I think are worth underlining, one of which is the ability to send data. And there are a number of standards proposals in process right now which would enable essentially data enclosures within things like instant messages, or even potentially within voice signaling. And that's a basic capability which if you have, you can use to build some of these distribution systems. So I would try to focus the blue sky thinking not just on the eventual implementation, because there can be a variety of engineering that can be applied to the back end as is necessary, but really on the base functional building blocks that you want to have available on the client, and in how that actually gets delivered into that infrastructure, because and you can't always predict how that will end up, what kind of services you can build, and hopefully at the end of it you'll be surprised at all of the ideas and the things you can build. But I think just focusing on the end result won't necessarily get you any closer to figuring out what you want to do.
Thank you. Greg?
Okay, couple things. First of all, Matthew, your question got lost back away, so I thought we would come back to it, so you didn't feel. You had asked for consumers, when they would consider something to be direct versus not direct. And I think that in talking to consumers, the key is whether or not they can tell that there's something between them and the person they're communicating with. Even with the PSTN, when I make a call, it doesn't go straight to 911. My call goes to a switching center, and then another one, and it finally gets there. But as far as a user, I'm talking direct versus talking to one person who is talking to another. So in the instances you had cited where there's some electronic conversion, so I'm typing on a TTY, but the 911 operator just sees it on their computer terminal, and then they respond in text and it comes back to my TTY, that would be considered direct, even though it's being converted into different forms along the way. As a user, I'm typing and the person typing back is there. If I talk and there's somebody else who is then taking my words and changing them into other words, and there's a delay, then that's what I think they're talking about, not wanting, they wanted to have direct communication versus they're saying something and then they're not really sure what was actually said to the 911, and then what comes back, there's always this feeling of was exactly what I said, and the delay. So I don't think there's a concern about electronic conversion of signals. Now, if you're going from, say, SMS, and it's changing into some other type, and it actually ends up changing the text that was actually sent, then I think it might be thought it was being indirect. But I've not heard any concerns from the disability community about electronic conversions when it's exactly the same message. It's only the indirect comes up when they feel like there's somebody standing in between them that they don't know if their words are actually getting through back and forth. So I think that's the real key there. Does that cover the question? Matthew? Okay, good. The other one, Mark, you had talked about, and I think a way to think about this, the approach you're talking about might be a virtual conference room. It's something that people might be able to get their hands on. So the call comes in and you bring the 911 person into the room. If it turns out they can't speak your language, then they bring somebody else into the room, but the information presented is still on the table, if you would. And so if it turns out that for some reason you need to bring somebody else in, you bring them in, but the caller feels like they're in the same context. They don't have the situation where they're in a panic situation, they explain everything, and then you say, just a minute, and the person comes out and goes, hi, my name is Tom, what's your problem? And you start all over again. So I think this idea of a virtual conference room, that also helps with the idea that you bring in the 911 caller, and then you bring in what used to be a relay operator and now is thought of more as being an interpreter, because you bring them into the room and people can sort of envision that now I haven't lost the 911 operator, and whether the relay operator walked in first or the 911 operator walked in, it doesn't matter. They both ended up in the room with me, and we're all side by side. And I think that might be a good way of communicating that in thinking about this. And I think that's a really powerful model. Thank you.
Thank you. Henning and then Greg Fields.
Yeah, this is Henning. Just a quick comment on, I think Cheryl and somebody else mentioned it, on the Spanish translation part. One of the differences that is being envisioned in future the underlying protocol architecture is that devices and users have a much better ability to indicate preferences and capabilities. So even today on your web browser, if you dig deep enough, or depending on which version of the operating system you install, it has a language preference. So it can indicate whether, if a page is available in both English and in French, say in Canada, or in Spanish, it will automatically, without any action by the user, display that page if it indeed is available. And not every web page is set up to do that, but the technology exists to make that happen. And so you can easily imagine a similar setup, and indeed the existing standards provide for that, where if you've installed the Spanish language version of Android or Windows or whatever, the web browser would automatically, or your calling application in this case, would automatically default to indicating that you prefer Spanish as your language of communication, means of communication, and then the call center would, before they even pick up a phone, would know that it is at least likely, not 100%, but at least likely that they'll encounter somebody there who speaks Spanish. Now, for Spanish, that's not as big a problem because many call takers, even if they're not fluent in the language, will probably pretty quickly recognize that it is that. If it is a language in larger cities, which is not as common, generally today, the language line goes through an identification process where they try to determine which of the hundreds of possible languages it might be, and then find the appropriate interpreter for that language. That obviously adds delay to the process. So with an identification model, you can short-circuit a bit of that, and we should generally think more, I believe, on other modalities that might be useful to indicate at the beginning of the call, before it actually, as it rings, if you like, so that will make it a better experience for both the caller, in a sense they don't have to explain themselves, and the call taker, who doesn't have to fumble around to figure out how they can best communicate. And particularly if we go to a conference model for interpreters, we have to arrive at a model where the call goes directly to the call taker and then an interpreter is bridged in. We may have to think of such models so that you don't go through a minute for the call taker to realize, oh, this person actually needs I need a sign language interpreter on this to make communication feasible, and then bring it in, as opposed to being able to do that instantaneously when the call rings, while the call is actually still in queue at the PSAP. So that one comment. One other quick comment on the cloud thing before that. I don't think that changes anything in terms of the issues from a user experience. It's simply the servers that used to be, all the capabilities that used to be hosted at the PSAP, such as recording, media translation, conferencing, etc., are now hosted in a data center somewhere. And from a PSAP call taker perspective and from a caller perspective, that should be completely invisible. If it is not, somebody did some engineering wrong. But generally, that is more an efficiency consideration and a reliability consideration. And since a final remark on an earlier comment, the hope, certainly, in the discussions that we've had in the NG911 proceeding is that we're not faced with a more feature versus more reliability scenario. We can, if things work out well, and if we can get all the technology and regulation and deployment straightened out appropriately, we'll actually get both. The existing system has a number of reliability problems. Failover is limited, among other issues. Generally, the redundancy in end system communication paths and the PSAP communication paths is very limited. And we hope with an IP-based system, we can do much better than that. So I wouldn't see that as a contradiction necessarily, but clearly, particularly in terms of fallback to simple means when video, for example, isn't available for whatever reason, that needs to be taken into account during the system design itself.
Thank you, Henny. I have Greg Fields and then Joel, and then we'll attempt to take a little break.
Thanks, Dave. Answering Don's point, as of 2009, the U.S. Patent Office has been under some major reform Unlike other countries in the world, the U.S. is still first to file as opposed to first to invent. But there's a new derivation process to enable multiple patent applications to be validated based on inventiveness as opposed to just first to file. So that is happening. But at the same time, there is an opportunity for vendors who are in the space of accessibility to meet user needs in a way that's unique and then patent those methods, thereby disabling other members of the disability community who seek to provide a similar solution to the same customer, need to find a way other than the way that the competitor is patented. So when we bring this back to the blue sky discussions, it means whatever we're talking about, whatever's being requested and required of vendors who have to create solutions, that it's open enough to allow for multiple implementation styles, knowing that there are fewer companies seeking to provide solutions that may or may not require patents. So we need to be vanilla enough in our requirements to allow for multiple vendors to kind of make some money one way or another. They may troll, but we have to be a little loose in what the requirement specification is.
Thank you.
And if I can add an example, just so, so this is actually not just blue skies. There is a vendor who will go unnamed, who owns mobile devices, who has a really cool idea to disseminate information, and based on the user needs, disseminate that information based on the technology access requirements that they have, so that a piece of educational content could be delivered to all students, but those who prefer large font could receive it in large font, for example, and that there would be a central system that would do that, which is a great idea, but it's also a patent application, so anybody else trying to do the same thing, to meet perhaps a similar future regulatory requirement, couldn't do it in that way, for example.
Joel Zev, I'd just like to bring 2 points up that I think are important. One is the equal access discussion that we've had about being able to use any kind of sending device to be processed through a central processor at the 911 call center and handled in some way. But there's another change coming that down the line that I think will be very important. If I have an emergency and I can't talk for whatever reason, I can take a phone in any form right now, dial 911, drop the phone, and I'll get a response from a landline phone. Most phones developing now are cell. More and more phones coming online are cell, and many folks do not have a landline phone. It's totally relying on cell. When cell technology reaches a point, and it will, that it'll give an exact location of the cell call. It would then mean a cell phone in any form, including a very small one that I mentioned before, your wrist or a medallion. You dial the number 911 and drop, or whatever, the phone. That location would still be responded to as it is today for a landline phone. And we've solved an emergency, a life-death emergency. You would get someone responding to it. We have other problems of the queue of a 911 and all kinds of issues that people get stuck in the queue, like happened in New York during the snowstorm, and never got through. That's the reality that we're going to have to deal with. But as technology evolves in our blue sky next generation cell phone technology, you'll get accurate location, not just what cell tower you're near, but also eventually, as was said earlier, the altitude. And that's a longer way off. But that, I think, will solve a lot of our issues. And we should start thinking about, if that technology is there, cell phone, the cell phone is the sender, and as people here remarked earlier, that we're starting to provide those instruments, maybe even, forgive me, as a prosthetic device for those who are homebound, who can't do anything else, under traditional ways of providing those. Are we taking a break?
Yeah, thank you. I guess just, is there anybody else that wanted to say something that I missed, or the hand-raising tool, or online? Okay, yes, I think we're about ready. I think Peter wants to...
I can make a comment after the break.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break. We'll organize what we've heard today. We'll come back, Peter will make a comment, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
In time for 4 o'clock.
take notes. I said, man, everybody was on the thing. You get to where you're just scratching and doing stuff. I said, I'm listening to this stuff, but I'm not taking anything down. All right. All right. Are we ready to begin here in 30 seconds, please?
29, 28, 27.
Kind of like my four-year-old nephew. 31. Let's start.
22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10,
Okay.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right.
Blast off.
Here we go. We're going to get to the end of the day here a little bit. I think what we wanted to do is Peter had wanted to make a comment to Stu here. If there's any additional questions, we'll just take just a couple of minutes for the blue sky discussion. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Joel and Greg to kind of wrap up a little bit. And then I think we have an open discussion period, and I'll turn it over to Cheryl. So Peter, to you.
Okay, is this on?
Yes.
I think it is, okay. Thank you. I'm Peter Musgrove from AT&T, our alternate delegate to Brian Daly. We haven't said a lot in the brainstorming today, but just want to let folks know that we have done or participated in other brainstorming activities, and there are some results of those activities that are actually publicly available. Some of it may have been mentioned before, earlier on in this group. We just wanted to remind folks of that, and some is fairly new stuff. The first thing is in the NENA Next Generation Messaging Group, they created a document which is now publicly available on the NENA website called Use Cases and Suggested Requirements for Non-Voice-Centric Emergency Services. If folks haven't seen that, it would be very useful because there's some interesting use cases there that involve things like instant messaging between users, sharing pictures, video clips, audio clips, and that kind of information. So it's sort of the result of brainstorming that's already gone on from an industry standpoint. The other item of interest is the existing standards work going on in 3GPP for what started off as non-voice emergency services, or NAVIS. Since then, the name has changed to IMS Multimedia Emergency Services, or IMES. There was a contribution accepted this past week by roughly about a dozen companies, including some of the actually at least 3 operators in this room, to support this text messaging, basically, between users, including the real-time video, real-time audio clips. And so we think that would be useful information. What I can do, Cheryl, is provide you links to both of the documents I'm referencing so that next week sometime you can send those out to the folks here and they can look at it at their leisure.
That'll be good. Thank you.
Thank you.
You read my mind. I was going to ask them to send the links, so thanks, Peter. So we're going to jump over to the Greg and Joel over there to kind of just, I'm not saying summarize or capture or anything, but just to kind of give some comments from the last couple of hours for the blue sky. So you guys?
Okay. What we'd like to do as we wrap up here is first of all tell you what we did a little kibitzing on the side, and we're going to take all the notes. If you have taken notes, you can send them to Cheryl as well. And we're sending all of our notes to Cheryl, and she's going to put together, if possible, a one-page summary of all the key sort of bullet points, 2-page absolute max if it gets to be overrunning, and then send it back out to all of us so that we can look at it and say, oh, here was another key idea, so that we make sure we capture the really sort of key issues and points that have been made today, not by person, but just because a lot of times we all reinforce each other, but just what the key points were. so that we have those going forward as we go into the next round. So that's going to be the process. Between now and the end, which is coming up, and we can adjourn when we get to it, is to just make sure that if anybody has anything else that they thought of over break, et cetera, we want to be able to harvest that, make sure that we get it on there. You don't have to redo something that's already been said, because if it's not in somebody's notes, then you'll get a chance to add it to the notes coming up again. But if anybody had any additional thoughts, we'd like to take a chance right now to stop and go back out and capture any other ideas that people had. And then I'll toss it back to the chair, who will be talking about just sort of a preview of what's coming next. We're pulling the report together, so the really key point is to make sure you get your comments in on the reports and stuff. And then we're going to have to move on to the next phase, which is recommendation. But this is a really great start off. So any other thoughts or ideas that people had over break that we haven't already captured? Joel?
Joel Zev. I just want to comment. I appreciate everybody's input. I think it was a really good, wide-ranging conversation and provided an opportunity to really get a good start on this project. The next step, obviously, is putting everything we have into recommendations to the FCC, and I think the plan that I believe laid out will work with the goal of finishing this in a very short period of time. I think, but I think our next meeting will be critical in terms of getting information in, getting data, and really worked out really well. I think two things that we've come across is, one, that we really have to be able to focus on the caller's preference. I don't mean preference, but the caller's standard way of calling in 911, standard method of communicating out. Because there's thousands of people out there who are not sophisticated, who when an emergency happens, they're not going to become sophisticated in 2 seconds, and have to have a reliable, known method of getting help. And those methods are in place. We just have to make sure we institutionalize them to make sure they work, and then manage that data coming in, and that's another level, not the sender's problem, but it's the receiver's problem in managing and massaging the data so it's usable and we can get emergency services out there in a real emergency. Not long-winded kind of comments back and forth, but if there's a fire, if there's a heart attack, if there's a stroke, if someone fell, and on and on and on, we can get someone there to make it work. And I think that's the purpose of all of this. And I think that's basically where we're at, and I think we've done a good job in focusing on that. Implementing it, that's what Blue Sky is about. Thank you.
I do have, this is Cheryl King. Joel, you triggered another thought that I want to bring up, because I know that I have taken on this role and continue to think about people with disabilities who have an emergency and have a need to call 911 in order to get a response for help. But for years, with the Interagency Coordinating Council, I have been asked to speak a number of times on emergency communications, and the FCC's web pages will tell you that in the past there have been 3 modes of emergency communication. One is the EAS system, one is the 911 system, and the other is information over the television. But the calling is also being relied on greatly by our security and homeland security systems. They rely on there being a reliable method for citizens to report trouble. And so I think that doubles our emphasis on the role and the job that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. I guess just more of an agenda item. Should we stop to do the public comment period, or is that, I don't know if there's any, but should Should we just do that?
I think we can get that off the table, yeah.
Okay.
We'll call for public comment. There's a microphone. If anyone wishes to make a public comment to the group, speak now or forever hold your peace. I see no one rising or indicating they have an interest in speaking, so is there anyone on the bridge who has additional comments? All right, thank you. There'll be no public comment. No one has risen to the occasion.
Okay. Thanks, Cheryl. I just wanted to jump on that just to make sure we cover our agenda items. And just now doubling kind of back to the blue sky again. So again, I wanted to just say to Joel and Greg, thanks for picking up a lot of the activity in this area during the day. We had a couple changes and all that, so appreciate that. I wanted to thank AT&T for lunch today as well, so appreciate all that. And then I just kind of wanted to wrap up a little bit here on, we've had the blue sky discussion again. Cheryl will put together some notes on that. We'll get those sent out, and then please add additional comments and stuff so we can kind of work out the blue sky activities. Really looking forward, we're going to start coming up with our next meetings in July all the way through December, and a lot of that focus is now going to be starting to really work on sort of this recommendations paper. I appreciate the input from Peter. I think there's some great information there as well from sort of the use cases. I think there's things from the CISRC report and a variety of information that's been done over the years and even continue to be done to now. And then we'll start to probably more offline from here is get together, at least in our small team, to really start putting together the ideas for the agendas coming up for the recommendations paper. That's where, I guess probably the simple way to say it is that that's where a lot of work's going to start. So those that are like to write, can write, are willing to offer to write and input and comment, it's going to be a dedication of your time for this next period of time. So I think this is, in my opinion, more of the nuts and bolts of a lot of the work that's going to take just a lot more effort than maybe some of that other activities that have come up here. The other item I wanted to talk just a little bit was the survey report. We talked a little earlier today about posting that out there and getting your comments quickly, and that the idea would be to release that on the 24th of June, to have that publicly or before. So we'll get that out.
They have it.
You have it, okay. So you have it, please review it, please comment on it, and the intent of that is to publish that officially and have it released the 24th of June, if not
Sooner
before.
if possible. And again, if you have no comments, I would appreciate you letting me know that so that I don't, wait on a group that I'm not going to hear from. You could say it's wonderful.
That's it. I didn't have much more. I think, Greg, you wanted to comment, please?
Quick question, I guess, for the report, not the survey report, but the second report, the recommendations report. Do you have a time frame which we want to have that draft done by? Just for our own
We're working on a
awareness.
timetable. It needs to be presented to the commission by December 7th, 2011. So, backing it up from there, we're working on a timeline that will be finalized shortly.
Yeah. We won't have the review on the 6th of December, so if that's, we'll move it probably sometime in October, try to have the draft, kind of have that work done. So, we do have some offline work to put a little bit of the timeline for the next stages. So just kind of, we've done a survey, we have the report to wrap up, we now start into the recommendation section of this, wrap up some of the blue sky. So there's still a lot of work has been done, there's still a lot of work left to do, so that's really about all I think I had to do. I don't know if Patrick or Elliot had any comments on anything. Paul?
Paul Michaelis with Avaya. A quick sort of unrelated question. The legislation last year required manufacturers and service providers to send in a report to the FCC about status of what we've done and the one-year anniversary of the legislation.
Well, the date of enactment was October 8th.
Right.
I'm
And so are we
blanking on
expected
what-
to be filing a report with you October of this year? Well, I'm just wondering what the
There
status
are,
of
there
that
are
is.
many different deadlines.
Okay.
I don't know to which one you may be referring, Paul.
Yeah, we do a lot of reports.
I mean, this CVAA had a lot of deadlines and a lot of report requirements.
Yeah, what I recall, and maybe I'm wrong on this, is that on the one-year anniversary of the signing of the enactment of the bill, we're supposed to be providing a report documenting the extent to which we have been doing accessibility initiatives to improve the quality of our products and so on. Is that ringing a bell with you? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
it is ringing a bell, but I'm not, my finger's not in that pot, so
Okay.
I'd have to look it up for you.
Yeah,
but I will.
I've got a feeling I'm going to get stuck writing that for Avaya, so I was hoping to get some feedback about what's expected.
I don't have anything in my bucket that says I have to file in a report right now. I mean, I have other obligations, obviously, for certain reporting, but maybe
Manufacturers.
Greg has something I'm missing.
Hello, hello. Yeah, Greg Fields from RIM. I'm in the same boat, Michael. I'd have to be the one, and Paul, sorry, writing it. So that was the clearinghouse report. And the requirements for what the clearinghouse report will be is yet to be decided. And that is provided annually, that it qualifies all that's been done, improvements and functionality of your given devices to the FCC to then populate publicly. But that it was tied to the clearinghouse, which is yet to be defined as to what that will actually mean.
And isn't that a working group of the VPAC, the clearinghouse, or is it a separate section?
I have not seen any
Okay.
working groups yet.
I'll look it up for you, Paul, and find out what it is.
Okay, for now, if I just sent you a stack of my VPATs, would that make you happy?
Oh, well,
You're talking to Cheryl, not me, right? Don't send me any of your reports. I don't want to
excuse
look
me,
at
we're
them.
being recorded. I'll look it up for you, Paul, and let you know.
Good, thank you.
I don't think there's anything, but again, any other comments? Arnold.
Okay, I'm Arnold van Wijk. Normally, I participate remotely. And my problem is that it's difficult to get my voice being heard because I use the remote captioning service that's happening now as well, and I really appreciate it. But if one gives feedback, I have to then call and then still trying to get contact with the mysterious conference bridge. So my question is, there are two possible solutions. One is having Jabber site up or something like that, and people can get questions typing in and sending it via Jabber, and have somebody moderate it and pass it on. Or having Skype voice possibility as well, because you can then see that you're connected to it. So there are two possibilities.
I can give you an idea what I'm doing. I monitor the hand-raising tool, and a lot of people do that. And I'm also have my mobile hooked up there for text messages, because sometimes people text me, and they just show up on my screen. So I'm willing to give you my mobile number if you want to text, and I'll put you in the queue. However we can make sure you're heard, I'm open to those discussions, but I'd be glad to give you a number, the hand-raising tool, email address, anything that you want to call, because I have them all up here running, because people are contacting me. Hand-raising, email, and text are the three ways I get input. Go ahead, Greg.
I can share for what we use for VPAC is we use the stream text in addition to CART so that you would be able to have a chat window to insert your chats, and that's used for other FCC working groups.
I guess the action is we'll look at a couple of different ways and make sure that people can be heard. I think that's the key.
Right.
So. I'm done if everybody else is done. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.